The boy fell to the ground with a clatter and groaned in pain. The blow had been so hard that the cutting pain reverberated in every corner of his body. The girl towered over him, presenting a long sword to his throat. The crowd shouted with joy, anticipating the spectacle. The boy clenched his teeth and, already resigned to his fate, looked at the point of the sword, which was already close to his face. The girl with long hair hid her sword in her sheath and squinted contentedly. She had won this battle. Behind her, several people were whispering amongst themselves. It looked like Princess Fiona had won once again. She opened her eyes and glanced at her astonished opponent, who was still discussing what had happened in the distance. The girl, in a calm voice, said that his skill still needed to be honed for a long time. There was a look of disdain in her gaze. She bent down and gently placed her weapon on the ground. In a calm voice, she said that the guy's magic effectual abilities had improved since the last match. However, he hadn't mastered the magic sword yet. The boy looked at her with a frightened look. He was sorry that he hadn't won this fight, but he still had to admit that the princess had completely defeated him. Regret could be heard in his voice, and sadness, but nothing could be done about it. The guy's name was Ayres. The girl straightened up and said in a loud voice that everyone is equal in this academy. She turned to the boy and said that it wasn't worth mentioning that they had been friends since childhood. Fiona said in a disgruntled tone that it was rude to address her by her title like that. The boy looked away, his face twisting into a grimace. It was obvious that he was getting tired of listening to all this. She looked at him with a surprised and displeased look. Was he even listening to her? The girl's eyes widened and her voice rose a few tones. The boy gritted his teeth and kept looking away, muttering something to himself. The girl continued to snort unhappily at the same time. Moreover, she is now wasting her time to lecture him, although she has the duties of a princess. It was obvious that the kid was listening. Suddenly, his ears picked up strange words. Two girls who were standing nearby were saying that it would be nice to meet him. This guy looks really cool. The guy was surprised to hear such speeches to himself. He wasn't used to so much attention to his person. The girls kept whispering amongst themselves. They noticed that kid, he's rich too. His grades are among the best. As Fiona listened intently, her anger began to boil over. Suddenly, she couldn't stand it any longer and rushed towards the girls, screaming. She was fed up with this rude attitude. What are they doing? The kid just watched in horror from the sidelines. She came close to one of the girls, a grimace of madness on her face. She said in a fractional voice, "So you don't get in the way. This guy may be amazing and successful, but he's also a pervert." The girl was trying her best to get their attention away from the guy. She was getting more and more agitated by the second. She tried her best to talk the girls out of it. And what did they see in him? I mean, he hides a lot of perverted books in his room. Ayres didn't have the energy to listen to all this anymore. He covered his face with his hands and screamed with helplessness. It's the princess who ruins everything every fucking time. The girls laughed and began to disengage. No one was even considering Ayres as a boyfriend. They hurriedly withdrew. The boy gritted his teeth, tears of despair beginning to glisten in his eyes. Every time he got a good feeling, it was the villainess setting him up. Did she really hate him that much? But he needed to pull himself together. But that was okay. Someone had already taken over his heart. The guy clenched his fists and began to frantically wrinkle his t-shirt. The princess turned around and looked at Ayres. There was a kind of contempt in her eyes, and she looked down at him as if she felt superior to him. The girls behind her continued to giggle. She asked in a stern voice, would his hero father be disappointed? Hearing this, the boy's eyes widened in surprise. Those words like hitting him on the head with a hammer. It's true. It was. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. Indeed, his father would be very unhappy with his son's results. He stood there confused, not sure what to think. In the courtyard of the academy, the cheers of the students are heard. All of them are returning after their hard classes. The atmosphere of turmoil so familiar to this place floats in the air. Many students return to their rooms, talking among themselves about their grades, their physical condition, and how tired they were after class. Everyone was engrossed in their work and seemed not to even pay attention to each other. Life at the academy went on as usual. Two knights in shining armor were talking to each other. The war had already ended. and they had all achieved peace. But the current generation of students is lagging behind. They don't have what it takes. The men's voices sounded worried. Ayers swung his sword, casting a thunder spell. A huge energy wave flew forward, cutting through space. Soon it hit the training dummy. The shouts of battle rang out across the training field. The knights turned in that direction and noticed a boy who was practicing hard with a dummy. The knight looked at him in surprise. Looks like Lord Hero's son is practicing even during the break. He still seemed to be losing to Fiona. The boy was trying hard to increase his physical strength and hone the necessary skills, so he practiced without sparing his body. During the war, Lord Hero earned many accomplishments and earned the title of hero. It's important to me how admirable Lady Fiona's pedigree is. Her peers are not inferior to her. The boy held onto his sword with all his might, his body already covered in abrasions from hard training. But he didn't stop. All this while, most of the talent lost. Isn't that strange? Ayers gritted his teeth and tried to ignore the extraneous conversations. He needed to concentrate fully on his training. His father was one of the 7 heroes, 7 brave men who saved mankind from the great demon king. He tried his best to resemble his predecessor. With a sword or in class, he always ranked only 2nd. However, since he is the son of a hero, all people want to see his abilities. It was hard for him to prove himself, all this time staying in his father's shadow. 2 knights in full attire are standing in the hallway of a castle having a conversation. They are discussing the outstanding abilities of the children of other heroes and how society judges their talents. This conversation is about how hard it is to be judged by strict standards and what it means to be gifted in their world. Suddenly, in the midst of the knights' conversation, Ayers appears, interrupting them. His sudden appearance and simple, "Excuse me," causes the knights to turn their attention to him. Their faces expressing surprise and bewilderment at his unexpected intrusion into their dialogue. The knights turned around in surprise at the guy. He sadly said that he had now shown the Imperial knights a pitiful sight. He was ashamed of Zato for not being able to make any significant progress at his age. The knights try to comfort him and say there's nothing they can do about it if his opponent is Her Majesty's princess. But he shouldn't sit idly by. The guy doesn't seem to be listening to them and thinks, isn't it time for these liars to get to work now? The guard seemed to be very much into it and started lecturing the guy for the umpteenth time. Naturally, he would join the Imperial Knights after graduation and train under strict supervision. Ayers listened to all of this with a disgruntled expression on his face. Once again, everyone was lecturing him. The guy was terribly embarrassed to listen to all this. Suddenly, a familiar voice was heard from afar. The man said that when Ayers did get knighted, let them take care of this dumbass. A tall, stately man in a military uniform stood with his shoulders squared. It was the Lord himself, with his shiny epaulets on his shoulders and a ribbon on his chest. The boy didn't expect his father to show up here. When he heard those words, the boy was getting really angry. He hated it when his father was so dismissive of him. What was he doing here? He is always busy at his job. What is he doing here? At this time, Lord smilingly said that he heard that the kid had lost to little Fiona again. There was a clear sneer in his words. He approached his son and tried to cheer him up. The man said it was the same with him and the J. He'd lost to Fiona's father time and time again. Ayers averted his eyes and told him to shut up. He didn't like hearing all this. The boy tried not to look his father in the eye. He was ashamed. The Lord began to reminisce about his former accomplishments again, and switched back to his beloved self. He started talking about when he was a student at the academy. He was immediately put to fight with Ares' mother. The boy didn't like it when his father started talking about his merits. In the hallway of the school, Ayers hears his father once again talking about himself, even in spite of his son's difficulties. This one-sided conversation, full of conceit, causes Ayers to feel tired and frustrated, reflected in his slumped shoulders and silent, "Daddy." Silhouettes in the hallway paint a contrast between light and shadow, as Ayers declares with renewed confidence that he is ready to defeat the princess. His training with the sword from the ground up, his tenacity and accumulated experience fill his words with weight and determination. The Lord, with a slight smile and closed eyes, admits his guilt for failing to get the job done, which was proving to be a difficult task for him. He couldn't give his son enough attention. Or maybe he just didn't want to. The boy's face is obscured by shadows. He seems absorbed in contemplating his next move. He gritted his teeth in anger. His father kept admonishing him and told his son to just listen to the instructor's instructions. And saddest, she has a knight certificate. Ayers sits at his desk in class, tired and irritated. He feels that his father's lessons have taught him nothing, and all the accusations seem groundless. The surrounding atmosphere of despondency and despair emphasizes his isolation and inner struggle. At a late hour in the privacy of his room, Ayers is concentrating on his studies, surrounded by books and notes. His fatigue is evident in his slumped shoulders, but there is an unwavering determination in his resolve. He feels other people's expectations placed on him, but he does not give up under their weight. All this time, he was learning to face dangers and fight monsters. It was as if he was reaching with his arm as hard as he could, trying to catch up with the princess. In parting, his father threw him a couple of short and cold phrases. He didn't seem to feel any fatherly feelings for him at all. The boy listened to his lecture in silence, all the while clenching his fists in anger. The Lord looked at the boy perplexed. Ayers kept shouting, "What does he mean by type who grows slowly? I mean, he's always at work. He doesn't even pay attention to him. What kind of father is he? Did he give me enough training?" The boy was already shouting, and you could hear in his voice how much he was hurt by those words. All his life, all he'd heard was that he wasn't living up to someone's expectations. But he tried hard to be a little bit like his father. All the people around him always looked enviously in his direction, thinking that everything came easy to him, but it was not so. The guy was furious. Tears were already glistening in his eyes, and his breathing was hitching from the intense screaming. What's so bad about second place? Not being first is a bad thing? The boy couldn't hold it in anymore. He was sick of it all. His father never paid attention to him, never praised him. He'd been practicing hard all this time. It would be nice if his father praised him for once. He realized that his father is trying to comfort him because he feels bad, but he's doing the best he can. He doesn't have the energy left to take it all anymore. The father looked at his son in surprise and didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to support him in this situation. The boy turned his back on him and walked quickly in the opposite direction. He was completely sick of this. Ayers rudely threw in that he didn't need his father's pity. This was totally lame. Lord just stared after him without saying a word. He probably wouldn't have been able to say anything. Hero tried to click him off somehow, but the boy wasn't listening to him anymore. Inside, Ayers was torn with pain and self-blame. He's screaming and crying to himself. He doesn't even have anyone to talk to. The guy thought he looked like a complete idiot in this situation. Soon he found himself at home. It was a large mansion with many rooms, but it didn't give him warm feelings. The birds were chirping and the sun was shining brightly in the sky. Ayers kicked the gate with his foot, and it creaked open in his face. He was home. He was filled with many emotions, grief, anger, resentment toward all living things. At this time, he didn't even want to live. The boy looked around the corner and saw a woman dressed in a maid's outfit, apparently doing chores. He tried not to make a sound so as not to attract her attention. She heard him, though, and turned around, giving him a caustic and languid look. It was the maid who worked at their house. She was holding a small watering can, which she used to water the flowers in the flower bed. The boy was stunned at the sight of such a beautiful woman. Every time he saw her, his breath hitched and his cheeks turned red. The girl greeted him with a gentle voice. She smiled sweetly and squinted her eyes. She said that since classes were still going on, let the guy and returned immediately. At the end, she called him her little virgin. The girl's last sentence threw the guy into a stupor completely. This was their family's personal maid, Sadis. She did minor chores around the house. This girl had an ethereal beauty. Everything about her was perfect, and on top of that, she had a snide and cunning personality. Even before Ayers was born, her parents died in the war. She was an orphan, and the kid's mom decided to take her in with them. She's more like an older sister than a maid. All this time, the girl's been taking care of him. It was a pretty woman with big breasts and a perverted personality. Despite her perversion, the guy sincerely wanted her to be his wife someday. The girl looked at him with her playful gaze, a mysterious smile glistening on her lips. Ayers looked away and mumbled to himself that he was so bored with his academy classes that he was leaving early. The girl shrieked, and in her usual manner said that he was as mentally stable as a normal slug. she asked in a caustic tone. Did he lose to the princess once again? He turned away even harder. He definitely didn't like hearing such words against him. He was aware of it, but it annoyed him that everyone kept reminding him of it. The girl continued as expected. It was something corny. She giggled. Ayers closed his eyes irritably, and as usual tried to refute everything. He said it wasn't like that, even though he didn't believe it. He jokingly said that with his grades, he could skip any class and still be able to join the Imperial Knights. His voice was playfully confident so as not to give away his inner self-doubt. Isn't that what his father dreamed of and everyone around him? They dream of him becoming a knight, don't they? The boy tried to keep his cool. The girl looked at him and asked, "Is that why he's sulking?" There was a hint of sarcasm in her voice again. She asked the boy had he met the master. Ayers lowered his gaze. He certainly didn't feel like talking about it. All he needed right now was for everyone to finally get off his back. The mood was worse than ever. The kid fake thanked her for trying to cheer him up. Everyone is always wanting something from him, rebuking him for being the son of a hero. The boy snorted. The girl looked at him in surprise. He continued to sputter more and more. Everyone against his will compares him to someone. It frustrates him. It's so cool. Irony and sarcasm could be heard in his voice. The girl in a gentle voice began to speak. She said there were really a lot of different expectations placed on the guy. It wasn't reasonable because he's only human. It's complicated. Hearing those words, Ayers looked at the girl in surprise. Hero is the hero who defeated the Demon King. It is well known that he faced many hardships during his time at the academy. Unlike the young master, he had a great score at the academy. The boy listened in surprise and couldn't believe his ears. The girl continued to speak in her sweet voice. She said that everyone can't help but want to watch his dazzling growth. Their hopes, they are like good dreams. After that sentence, the girl thought a little. It's a respect to how precious the boy is to everyone. Ayers silently listened to all of this with his eyes wide open in surprise. He thought, usually when this pervert with the sharp tongue showed concern, it was always some kind of subterfuge. So he'd have to be careful now. She is, however, she's always supportive when he's upset. Don't deny it. All these words made the boy's cheeks redden with embarrassment. That's why he fell in love with Sadis. He remembered how he had always chased her tail as a child. Sadis squinted her eyes and said in a peculiar tone that if the young master did his best, she would reward him in a special way. The last words were spoken with some special intonation. When he heard it, he almost fainted from surprise. After a little silence, she added that in that case they would make his favorite omelet from his childhood. Hearing this, it was like the boys hit something on the head. She starts talking to him like a child again. The girl blushed and looked at him with the most tender look she could muster. The guy couldn't control himself anymore. He was both pleased and annoyed by the way this girl was talking to him. In her eyes, he wanted to look as mature as I could in front of anyone else. Finally, in an effort to finally keep from coloring, the guy said, "Shut up." He'd had enough of this. The girl yelped. She said she didn't know if the mood was better or not, but it was time for the annual cleaning of the sealed room. She turned her back to him and winked. The guy slanted a disgruntled look at her. Soon they came to a room with many weapons and different armors. There were long, sharp swords hanging on the walls. It looked like some sort of armory. Ayers was holding heavy buckets of water. He couldn't even fully unbend, so heavy they were. The girl goes back for cleaning supplies, and the boy waits for her here. She handed him a bunch of keys and told him to let him go ahead and entertain himself with the Sword of Legends for now. A large bunch of keys jingled as they fell into the boy's palm. Sadis wished the guy good luck in stealing that sword as a farewell. He turned around and angrily said that he wasn't going to do anything. The girl only smiled and giggled in her usual manner. Ayers, clucking his tongue and playing with a bunch of keys, walked briskly toward the room. The sound of his footsteps echoed throughout the long corridor. Soon he stopped in front of a huge, heavy door that was sealed with many chains. It was a room that few people ever entered, because it was strictly forbidden. Before he was born, a great war had swept across the land. On one side was a race of demons. Facing his father's side, the 7 heroes led by humanity. Mankind prospered in this war, and in the end, the Demon King was defeated by his father's sword. This event went down in history and made Father Aersa a great hero. This sword was placed on a sealed pedestal behind this door. In deep childhood, his father showed it to the boy. From that moment on, he became obsessed with the idea of possessing this weapon. When he was a kid, his heart would beat like crazy every time he saw it. The boy's eyes widened and glistened with joy as soon as he saw that shining sword. But now he's not a kid anymore. Well, he must make this one. The lock opened and the heavy chains fell to the stone floor with a clatter. A ringing metallic sound echoed throughout the house. It was another heavy door. Ayers pressed his whole body against it, trying to move it out of the way. After a second, the door gave way, and with a loud creak, it began to open inward. A bright beam of light entered the room, illuminating the small space inside. There was a ghostly figure with white hair. It was the ghost of some girl. She watched with interest as the heavy door that hadn't been opened in a long time finally opened. Inside the room, there was some strange feeling of coldness and death. It had been a year since this door had last been opened. The girl cast a languid glance toward the door. Her long white hair developed silently even in the absence of wind. The girl had 2 huge horns on her head. Seeing her, the kid went cold with fear and his eyes widened. He didn't realize who this even was. Inside him, it was as if something fell down inside him. His whole back was covered with huge goosebumps. Is it a man? A woman? No, it was something else. The creature cast a languid glance in the guy's direction. That door's been open 15 times. The girl wondered if it had been 15 years. Meanwhile, the boy continued to study her appearance with horror. Does she have horns on her head? That means... His breath came out in fear. It's not the maid as usual. Is that a demon? He continued to study her with a frightened look. His body as if his body was restrained by something. He couldn't move even a finger. The woman looked at him with a scrutinizing gaze. Suddenly she realized this looked like Hero's offspring. There was a spark of mystery in her eyes. Still realizing that someone had snuck in, he oohed and asked the guy fearfully, "How did he get in here? Who was he?" The girl was frightened and surprised at the same time. The guy couldn't understand anything either. He gritted his teeth in fear, and his face was covered in cold droplets of sweat. A vile facial expression out of a million. Para didn't know what to do. He had come face to face with a demonic being, and now his life was in danger. The demoness looked at him with eyes widened in surprise. She didn't seem very happy to see the guy in her chambers, where no one had entered for over 15 years. Ayers didn't understand anything either. Was it a thief? But why a demon? Suddenly the door creaked behind the boy's back and the maid's voice was heard. She was calling for him. The demoness didn't realize, this guy, what was seeing her. At this time, Ayers did not know what to do. His soul almost left his body from fear. The maid opened the door and asked. He was making a noise, trying to get the sword wrong either. The boy shouted, pointing his finger to the back of the room, that someone was standing there. His voice shook with fear. Sadis tilted her head and looked around the room in surprise, but saw nothing there. She turned away and started walking away from the room. Said that because of his lingering virginity, is he seeing hallucinations? When he heard that, the guy was stunned again. What the hell is she talking about? Sadis didn't understand. Was this some kind of prank? She calmly walked over and picked up the mop, ready to clean. Ayers was already stuttering with anger and incomprehension. The girl didn't seem to pay any attention to it. She noticed that the bucket was empty and went to fetch water with quick steps. The demon approached him from the back, seeming to be the only one who could see him in this form. It was very strange. Feeling the cold wind at his back, the guy was completely covered in goosebumps of fear again. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and grabbed the mop to protect himself from the demon spawn. It was hardly a mop that could do him any good, of course. He grasped the wooden handle and pointed the cleaning supplies straight at the demon, trying to defend himself. His eyes blazed with madness, and his breathing hitched in an inexpressible horror. The demon said that compared to Hero Ayers' magic sword, it was nothing. He's just a lowlife. When he heard such words, he instantly became angry. His eyes widened and his pupils narrowed. He grabbed the wooden mop holder and lunged at the demon. Ayers rushed at him and swung the mop, but to the boy's surprise, it went through the demon's body without doing any damage. The creature whispered that it was all pointless. The boy turned around in surprise. He didn't understand what was happening. Meanwhile, the demon said gloatingly that he had a ghostly body, and his efforts were just some kind of mischief. He smiled, a mischievous fire in his eyes. "Ghost body, what is he talking about?" The demon said in a calm voice that nevertheless He hadn't talked to anyone for a long time. Sitting cooped up in this room, it's pretty boring. His mouth stretched into a wide smile. He put a hand to his face and said it looked like he should introduce himself. He spread his arms apart and his voice took on an intimidating tone. He said his name was Tamer, the same as the one whom Father Ersa defeated. The great demon king. The boy was even more frightened when he heard that. The great demon king Tamer, there was no one in the world who didn't know his name. It was a terrifying creature whose power could not be measured. The boy's eyes slowly began to open. The first thing that appeared before them was the frightened face of the maid, who was trying hard to reach him. Somehow the boy found himself in his bed. It was a scary dream. He opened his eyes wide. A worried sadist was standing beside his bed. Ayers got up from the bed and looked at the girl. What was she doing here? He was still trying to figure out where he was, and what had happened to him. His heart was pounding loudly in his temples. Sadis hugged him tightly and pulled him against her. She seemed to be very frightened of something, but the boy couldn't understand what had happened. Ayers immediately became embarrassed and blushed. The girl hugged him tightly and didn't seem to pay any attention to his reaction. The boy found himself in his room on his bed. He didn't remember what had happened, but Sadis was sitting next to him, looking at him with a frightened look. The girl said that when she returned with a bucket of water, she found the guy lying unconscious in front of the pedestal. But he seems fine now. It was just a little dizzy. He sat there looking at her with big eyes, still trying to figure out what had happened. His head was ringing, and a little dizzy. He looked up and saw this same demon he had seen recently in the locked room. How had he gotten out of there? The boy's heart beat again with redoubled frequency, and his body was covered with goosebumps. The demon hovered over his bed, staring at him silently with a calm gaze. The maid, too, must have noticed Ayers' fright, and raised her head upward but saw nothing. Ayers saw everything perfectly well. The demon's snide face was just a few centimeters away from the maid's face. She didn't seem to notice anything, just stared worriedly at the boy. There was nothing there. She's not going to play along with a little frisky boy. She had too many things of her own to do as it was. The girl got up from her chair and quickly left, saying goodbye that she would let the boy have fun while she cooked dinner. She smiled and quickly slammed the door. The boy did not even have time to say anything in response. The door slammed shut and the kid was left alone with the horrible demonic creature. The horned monster looked at him obliquely, as if proving its point once again. Except for the boy, no one could see him. Ayers is the only one who can see and hear him. The boy shifted his gaze to him. He asked, "It's the great demon king Tamer, isn't it?" The demon's face took on a smug look and he smiled broadly. Ayers was angry, even if he believed it was really the demon king. So how did he end up in their armory? Tamer wondered. After a little thought, the demon replied that he had been defeated by the hero, and ever since, his spirit had been sealed in a sword, the very one that now stands in the armory. Because of that, he was locked in that room for the past 15 years. But Hero kept that sword without knowing it. The demon's voice became sad. Now for some reason, only this guy can see him. And it looks like he owes him his life, if you can call it that. The guy began to ponder aloud. Was he really being haunted by the Demon King's ghost? Apparently hearing this, the demon said resentfully that it was a rather rude expression. Unfortunately, his ghostly body is unable to make contact with this world, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't separate himself from it. All this time, the demon has been chasing the boy wherever he goes, and in whatever situations he finds himself. Alas, he had grown bored with this conclusion, so now the guy is obligated to take it with him to the outside world. Hearing this, Ayers blew up and shouted that there was no way he was going to do that. He's the Demon King, he can't leave this place. Tamer crossed his arms over his chest and glared at the boy. He must have misunderstood him. He's an all-powerful Demon King. His voice became sinister again and his face was distorted with a sinister grimace. And now the boy must obey him and bow before him. Ayers asked, "Didn't he say he couldn't interact with this world?" The Demon King puffed up his cheeks in offense, but it didn't seem to have any effect on the kid. He can't pout. He did it to himself. So he's gonna have to deal with it now. Tamer puffed up his cheeks even more. The boy said he couldn't go out tonight anyway. The demon began to puff up his cheeks even more. Now he looked like a hamster. Could he stop making such a grimace? The guy was starting to get annoyed. The demon moved too close to him, but the boy couldn't push him away, because the creature's body was ghostly, and his hands went right through him. He continued to sulk with resentment, and the boy tried to push it away with his arms, but it was all in vain. But still, Ayers agreed to take him for a walk. The demon smiled happily, and his eyes sparkled with happiness. He'd gotten his way after all. The kid said sternly that it would just be a quick walk around town. Demon was agreeable to that too. He waved his hands with joy, clenching them into little fists, and he'd finally made it. He had been cooped up for so long that any walk would be a holiday for him. From his room, a maid was already coming to him and wanted a cart of food. She apparently heard him talking and asked if he was going somewhere. Oh shit. She heard him after all. Sadis put her hand to her face and looked at the boy in surprise. Tut hastened to assure her that it was just to go to town for a while. The girl flapped her big eyes, understanding nothing. The girl whispered quietly, "Is he going to go for a walk?" She couldn't believe her ears. Suddenly the girl twitched and in one swift motion threw her fork and knife at him. Does he want to die? The girl took on a threatening look and got into a fighting stance. Ayers barely had time to dodge. He looked fearfully at his maid. What had gotten into her? The fork and knife stabbed into the guy's jacket, completely immobilizing him. The demon noticed all this, and for a second he doubted that this girl was really a maid. Her fighting skills didn't fit her image at all. He frowned. She noticed that the young master looked sad after losing to the princess and having a fight with his father. So to cheer him up, she led him to his father's ball, which he had loved so much as a child. But then, he'd fainted, so she was going to treat him to dinner and a private bath. The girl's voice took on an enigmatic tone, more like threatening. Ayers tried to hold himself together. He looked fearfully at the girl and couldn't say a word, only stammered. However, he's already healthy if he's going to the city. Sadis smiled broadly. The boy frightenedly tried to assure her that he was still very sick and let her please pamper him. His voice sounded pleading and scared. He was beginning to fear this maid. At this time, the girl also smiled and looked down at him for skipping class this afternoon. She paused for a moment and said that he needed to be punished, and he sounded kind of playful and even threatening. My face became somehow mysterious and even kind of perverted. The boy and the demon looked at each other, a chill running down their spines. Even the Demon King was shocked at this treatment. He certainly didn't expect this from a mere maid. Oh, and a maid, or was she really a maid? There were too many questions here. The boy asked in a trembling voice what she meant. It was already night outside and it was beginning to rain lightly. Only a few windows in the house were burning brightly. The city was bustling with activity. There were many people on Central Street, each of them busy with his own business. Life was boiling in its own way. Ayers was walking down the street, dressed in his school uniform. It was new day, which meant it was time to go to the academy. But the boy was too exhausted after last night. The maid finally let him go, but now he had another problem. From outside, the demon's delighted cry came to him. It seemed he had seen something unusual again. It was an ordinary lantern, but the Demon King, imprisoned for more than 15 years, now considered absolutely everything in their real world unusual. He asked in surprise, "What was that thing?" The guy started to explain that it was a lantern. It lit up at night with magic. When he saw the streetcar, the demon looked at it in surprise. His admiration was unbounded. He asked, "What is this thing?" The guy started to explain again that it was a steam engine that transports people with the help of water and magic. The demon was greatly surprised. It was astounding. Humans were indeed very different from demons. A joyful smile shone on his face. No wonder, since he had gotten out into the real world after a long time. Ayers gave him an annoyed look and said, "He's acting like a child here. Is he really a powerful demon?" He hovered in the air, looking down at the kid. He asked him what he thought of this city, based on what he had seen so far. After being silent for a bit, the demon began to speak softly. Was he asking for his opinion? Tamer said that human society has developed a lot and has a lot of things, but she has forgotten the crisis of the past. There are these terrible vistas everywhere. He shifted his gaze to the side where the drunkard lay, holding a liquor bottle. The condition of these people, even to him, an enemy of men to look at, was very certain. If he were alive, the demon began to speak dreamily. On his face, his voice hard, he said that he would destroy everything here. Well, it's been 15 years, but he hasn't changed a bit. Ayers stunned, looking up and down at him. Demonov sighed, contrary to his feelings. It didn't matter. After all, this world came into being only because of his defeat. A city built by human ingenuity and ingenuity. What he sees, it's reality, and he can't change it. He had lost, and there was nothing he could do now. The demon's voice became sad, and he just stared wistfully into the distance at the many houses that lined the sky. Everything he saw now was unfamiliar to him. He's kind of weird. Ayers looked at the demon in surprise with apprehension. However, if he could, he would destroy it tomorrow. Still, the Demon King didn't change his traditions. He still remained an evil creature, and from the underworld, Ayers began to remember the Demon King in his book was a brutal, bloody tyrant. He shifted his gaze again to the Demon King floating in the air. But the man in front of him more multifaceted. He's just watching, but at the same time he realizes there's nothing he can do. From the back, he looks all alone. The guys take a minute and feel a little sorry for him, but he couldn't bring himself to say it. Suddenly, the demon's voice came out. He said he had only one regret. Tamer continued to stare thoughtfully into the distance. He seemed to be remembering the days of the past. Those images came back to him. All the power of those heroes who slew him is in that sword. He thought back to that moment when he stood before the hero and trembled with fear. Would he really kill him in front of everyone? The Demon King tried to cover himself with his hand from the sparkling light that was heading straight in his direction to sizzle him. Tears rolled down his eyes and he pretended to cry. Is this the end of him? Is he going to be killed now? A powerful beam of magical energy pierced the tower and a deafening demon scream rang out. For him, it was all over. The same 7 heroes gathered the might of all men just to defeat him. He gritted his teeth in anger. Apparently, the memories were making him uncomfortable. Tamer covered his face with his hands and began to whimper bitterly. He was very upset. No wonder. The most powerful Demon King had been defeated and forced to live in confinement in a ball. Ayers watched from the sidelines and even felt some sympathy for the demonic creature. The demon started funny stomping his feet on the paving stones. Why were these all heroes attacking him at the same time? Guy asked, what happened to one of them in the battle? Didn't the king have an army? He's the Demon King after all. Didn't he have any allies? What kind of king is he then? Tamer sniffed resentfully and raised his head up. He tried not to lose his dignity, but he was a Demon King. A second later, the Demon King turned around, waving his robe. He said there would be no more questions. Looks like he took offense after all. Ayers seems to have hit a nerve. The demon didn't seem to be paying attention. He was staring off into the distance. His eyes suddenly rounded again. He looked at the bookstore. This book was called Destiny. The demon asked passionately, would the left watch this movie at night? The guy wondered, did he know that franchise? It was pretty popular. Suddenly, he came close to the boy and looked at him with puppy eyes. He put his hands on his shoulders and in a conspiratorial voice, asked him to buy it. The boy didn't know what had gotten into him. Why should he be the one to buy the book? The demon shouted that he had been a fan since the moment he was born. At the same time, 2 guys were standing outside the store, tears on their faces as they looked like the work had left a lasting impression on them. The demon looked at him with crazy eyes. If he didn't get him that book right now, it would constantly whisper something in his ear. The guy ironically said that the demon was the very embodiment of evil. The boy couldn't stand it anymore and ran in the opposite direction. This demon was getting to him. He must hurry or he'll be late. The Demon King ran right after him. Tamer said he could listen to his inner voice and he didn't have to yell like that. The boy turned around and looked at him. The clock on the academy tower began to chime loudly, announcing the start of class. I had to hurry up to avoid the teacher's scolding. Ayers was sitting at his desk, not enthusiastically looking at his notebook. He needed to write down the lecture. The demon was sitting, or rather hovering near him in the air. Tamer turned to the boy with a question. He asked the guy, who is that girl? And pointed his finger at a girl who was sitting a little higher up, writing something in a notebook. Ayers turned around and said that it was the princess. This is Her Majesty Princess Fiona, daughter of His Majesty the J Hero. The demon was surprised that Hero with the spear has a daughter. Amazing. Everything makes perfect sense to her in this group. She must be very smart. The demon scrutinized the girl. The boy confirmed, this girl is a real badass. She's surrounded by an incredible aura. Even the slightest movement of her hand is precise. The girl sat upright, not even hunched over, her gaze fixed forward. It embodied all her determination. Unbelievably, she is also strong in martial arts. With a single glance, the demon knew what she was all about. Ayers lowered his gaze. He was aware of that, but he didn't want to admit it. Even the great demon king says, "What a stunning princess." Tamer scrutinized the princess's every move. The demon started to call out to the guy, but there was no response to any of his words. Suddenly, a heavy book came crashing down on his head. "The devil, he's been spotted after all." The teacher's voice was thunderous. The man approached the desk and said sternly that the boy must be very brave, since he could be distracted in his lectures. Ayers rubbed his bruised head resentfully. Teacher said that he was staring at Princess Fiona. Hearing this, the girl instantly blushed and looked at the guy fearfully. Ayers was horrified by such a statement. Poor Fiona ducked her eyes into the book. Her cheeks immediately flushed a deep red. Is he really looking at her? She was burning with shame. He is looking. It's impossible. She tried to hide her embarrassment and shame, but she couldn't do it well. The teacher said in a stern voice that as punishment the boy must answer the question. Let him name the 3 main magic eyes that exist in the world. Ayers began to stammer. Does he have to name them all? Obviously the boy didn't know. Moreover, the teacher said, let him name the magic eyes that Demon King Tamer possessed and their abilities. The boy got up from behind his desk and said he wasn't listening to anything. Sacks could be heard behind him. Tamer said wryly that he would have known everything if he hadn't been distracted. The boy was having trouble remembering. The name he knew, but the ability. He said there was the heraldic eye, the eye of moonlight, and of course the great Demon King had. The boy paused dramatically. He began to mumble something under his breath, trying to remember. The demon was terrified, trying to stop him. He was saying it was a dodge, and urged the guy to stop. He tried to shout at the kid and say something about him having heraldic eyes that wasn't true. But the kid wouldn't listen to him, just looked in his direction. At last he gathered his thoughts and shouted to the whole audience that the last eye was called the Eye of the 6 Gates. For a moment there was silence in the audience. No one spoke a word. Ayers sighed. He realized he was in trouble once again. The demon rolled his eyes. He hadn't succeeded after all. Tamer looked at the boy with a tempestuous look. The teacher lost his temper. Is this guy messing with him? Ayers didn't know what to say. He wasn't good at history. Or he just didn't know. The demon was furious. He was sure he had the Eye of the 6 Gates. He used it during the final battle. The teacher said in a stern voice that the boy would stay after school. It was unbearable. Tears came to the boy's eyes. For him, it was the worst punishment. But the worst was the demon, because he would have to sit with the boy. Ayers screamed with impotent anger. It was all because the demon had lied to him. The one had denied it. He had told the truth. It was his history teacher who was wrong. At this time, the man just watched them and tried to keep his cool. Once again, the teacher said the very phrase that made the boy's insides boil. He's the son of a hero. Ayers frowned. There it is again. Tamer looked away. He was disgusted to even look at the boy. At the same time, the teacher continued to reprimand him, saying in a stern voice that the boy should be the best student because he was the son of a hero. The huge bell in the chapel rang again, announcing the end of the lesson. The teacher said he had better not fool around in his match. Ayers was walking down the street with the Demon King hovering beside him. The kid couldn't believe he was being held up because of this ghost. Tamer rolled his eyes and said it wasn't his fault. No, it was exactly his fault. Ayers boiled with anger again. Demon asked the guy, what was that match that imbecile teacher was talking about? Ayers looked at him thoughtfully. The graduation match is the Academy's biggest event of the year. The best fencers fight in a tournament to show the king and nobles their skills. In other words, it's an intelligence training ground for various combat organizations. He participates because of his grades. But the guy faltered. The demon asked, what's the matter? That idiot teacher told him to take it seriously. Did he even prepare in any way? Ayers looked sadly in Demon's direction. In a sad voice, he replied that he was not preparing himself in any way. He was only preparing himself for disgrace. Tamer looked at him coldly. It was obvious that he was not happy with this answer. He began to speak in an orderly tone. If that's the case, then that girl, Princess Fiona, right? Is she the one the guy keeps talking about? He turned towards Demon and looked at him with a surprised look. The demon was telling him. The boy didn't know what he was talking about. He just looked at the Demon King with an uncomprehending stare. Continued, he said he could read a guy's mind, right? His envy of her felt almost physical. He feels he can't stand up to this girl. And it doesn't matter that he's a disgrace compared to his father. He wants to return to the world. However, he submitted and decided that it was impossible. The demon spoke calmly, even angrily. He was right about something after all. Tamer said the kid was no different from the genius who got stuck in the well right after he realized he was weak. The kid's face became frightened. His eyes widened. A few seconds passed and the kid became enraged. He yelled at the demon not to mess with him like that. What could he possibly know about him? The guy was just boiling with rage. This is some kind of insolence. I don't know what kind of demon dares to reproach him for something. Tamer just looked down at him again with his contemptuous gaze. What was it with him before was somehow different. The demon asked, and what? That was his entire counter-argument. Something seemed kind of weak, as expected. There was disappointment in his words. His father, Hero, was a fool who stumbled upon many wonders along the way. That's where the son couldn't match his father. He wanted to strangle the demon here and now, but he couldn't do it even if he wanted to. Ayers clenched his fist with such anger that it crunched. His mouth began to curse and he couldn't control himself any longer. The gloating demon's gloating ending to his grip. Out of anger, the guy called the demon a bastard. How could he stand up to the battle? All those accusations against him started to come to mind, and that made the guy even more furious. He was so sick of hearing all these inflated expectations in his address that he couldn't keep himself in control anymore. He stood naturally in his fist and shouted at the demon. He shouted that he had lost. Hearing this, the Demon King looked at him in surprise. Such a reaction he didn't seem to have expected. Ayers wailed with helplessness. He said he couldn't surpass his father. You could hear the pain and the sadness in the boy's voice. The demon lost to his father, and then made excuses that it wasn't a one-on-one battle. Tamer started making excuses again. He said it was true. If they fought one-on-one, he would definitely win. The kid shouted, "Let him make more excuses. That way he definitely wouldn't be believed. The demon just keeps making more and more excuses. Everything that comes out of his mouth is an excuse." Now the Demon King is getting really angry. He was hurt by the boy's words. Ayers was already in a frenzy, shouting like a madman. He shouted that the demon dare not lecture him about strength and courage. Tamer was furious at such words. How dare this guy talk to him like that? Ayers saw all of this and immediately stopped talking, and looked at the monster with a frightened look. The demon was suddenly transformed, its body completely black. He stared at the boy with his empty eyes. He held out his clawed paw to the boy. The monster shouted that in that case the guy would serve as proof of how mighty he was. He grabbed the lad's chin with his huge hand. Ayers did not remember himself from fear. He looked at him with wide, bulging eyes and could not say a word but only stammered. How could this demon with a ghostly body touch him? He couldn't do that before. In a dull voice, the demon said it was using the kid. He touched his finger to his forehead. Ayers just watched his every move fearfully and couldn't even move out of fear. The demon's eyes made with black as pitch. He towered over the boy and glared at him. The demon said to teach him the power that the Demon King himself possessed. At this time, all the other people were just going about their business and didn't even realize what a powerful force had broken free. And the demon continued to rage. He shouted that the whole world would witness his power once more. In a loud voice, Tamer shouted that the tournament had not yet come. He pointed his finger in the direction of the school. So the first thing they'll do is start by checking his general characteristics. The boy was horrified when he heard that. It looked like this creature was serious about training him. But he quickly pulled himself together and in a cold voice refused. The demon shouted at him. Tamer angrily asked the boy why he was so reluctant. He replied that it was because it was all suffering. The boy's voice was indifferent. They only have 2 months until the tournament, right? It's obvious that the princess is going to take first place, like always. It's impossible to surpass such a skill in just 2 months. At this time, the demon wasn't listening to him, but was thinking about how to make this lazy man learn. He started poking the boy in the forehead with his long claw. The demon said that little ones like him are easy to teach at first. He only fears for further training. The guy even asked Sadie's, who has a knight certificate, to train him. Academy training, self-training. Nothing works. This prodigy, however, always destroys all his efforts. How can he do that? What a mediocrity. The guy was lying on the ground completely tired and exhausted both mentally and physically. Beside him lay his sword. There was only one thing on his mind. Why only him? It's cruel to judge someone's failure without taking into account how hard they tried. The demon thought, he seems to lack proper motivation. That's what happens when someone doesn't know and underestimates themselves. What are his plans for the future? The kid thought, now he's going to become an Imperial knight. He sounded a little uncertain. Demon asked the guy, did he decide that on his own? Or was it done by someone else? Hearing such a question, the guy stood in a stupor, and really, if he can't find his purpose, then where will he get his motivation from? The kid was starting to realize something after all. Really, all this time, he's just been performing the movement on automatic, without the slightest motivation. But he didn't want to be some special warrior. If he became an Imperial knight for a while, things would settle down. The boy wondered, but was this really his ultimate goal? He seemed to be doing all this just because his father said so. This question finally threw him off balance. What did he really want? That was the only question in his mind. Is he an independent person or not after all? The demon exhaled and calmly said that they should set a more attainable goal first. He poked the guy with his clawed finger. They should get him victory in the tournament in 2 months as well. Let that be their initial goal. Ayers frowned. This was too fast, and from that impossible. The demon continued. But later he would have to find something that would motivate him these next 2 months. Something better than abstract ideas about peace and justice. Dirty motivation can do better than that. The kid thought for a moment. The rope ladder fell to the floor with a soft pop. They were on the training ground. The guy didn't understand what they were doing. Why did they come here? The demon explained that it was called ladder training. That didn't make it any clearer. Ayers looked at him in surprise. He was starting to get a little annoyed with it. Demon was always speaking in riddles. Tamer cheerfully said that this training would improve his stamina and agility. He also needed to learn the final stride technique. This is a magical step. Demon's eyes lit up with happiness. It looked like he was starting to get excited. He was beginning to enjoy teaching this kid. Ayers grudgingly thought that this title was really lame. Hearing that, the demon puffed up his cheeks in resentment. How is that so? Damn, he'd forgotten that the demon could read his mind. But the Demon King seemed to forget that quickly and flew toward the stairs. Now he would show him an example. He looks off into the distance, saying quietly, the Demon King's studies will soon shake the world. His gaze is full of determination and mystery. What could it be? She pondered, gazing up into the sky. I'm off, replies the demon, ready for an unknown challenge. A high-pitched cry of "Baar" is heard as he rushes forward, fearless and determined to overcome any obstacles. The boy asks the question in surprise. The demon must have gotten angry and started yelling at him. Doesn't the kid understand anything at all? He stood on the ladder to show him an example of what to do. The demon said that first, you must press your feet together and stand in front of the ladder, then leap forward without touching the stair rail. The demon jumped and found himself at the other end. It's called a straight jump. The kid thought he'd give it a proper name later. Is this really training? The boy looked puzzled at all this action. Tamer jumping around like that in his black clothes looks like... The boy began to imagine. The image of a huge, fat Maid beetle popped up in his mind. He could hardly contain his laughter. It looked really comical. The demon turned to him with a mad grimace on his face. Ayers apparently noticed it and hurriedly apologized, lest he bring the demonic creature down on me. He tried his best not to think of these funny images in the presence of the demon, so as not to laugh again. At this time, the Demon King began to show him the next exercise as if nothing had happened. He began to jump in zigzags. This time, jumping on the sides of the stairs, you have to keep your feet together. He imagined the funny picture again. This time, the demon looked like a shrimp, wagging its little tail helplessly. He could barely contain his laughter anymore. Tamer turned around and looked at him with a deadly stare. He had the will to kill. The boy was silent at once. The next exercise, the demon began jumping between the stairs, bringing his legs together and spreading them apart. It was a concentration exercise. The demon told the guy to do it fast, as in Kenkepa. Ayers began to visualize it vividly. He imagined himself along with the other children and the demon playing this childish game. One of the Zadorn girls said it was Taner's turn. The demon was dressed in an ordinary school uniform. He had a small child's backpack on his back. He was wearing short baby shorts and a shirt that was obviously very small on him. He bounced around the circles cheerfully. humming a children's counting song. Tamer noticed it again and got even angrier. He said that if the boy didn't stop doing that, he was going to kill him now. The demon was angry. The boy didn't seem to understand the importance of this training. The boy began to wave his hands away and babble that he understood everything. He didn't want to make this demonic creature angry. Seriously. Now from those 3 steps he showed the boy. Make one that he's trying to teach the main character. At the same time, have him use the magic attribute, he says. The boy wondered. Magic attribute. So all he has to do is jump and use magic. Well, it doesn't sound that complicated. It's worth a shot. The boy went to the ladder and started jumping. The demon shouted for him to use cross-step and fire magic. The guy clumsily entered step by step. He didn't have time to orient himself. And from the outside, it looked like a penguin dance rather than a battle step. He spoke step by step, his feet moving clumsily. The demon stood behind him, chuckling softly. The boy was getting nowhere, his body not moving the way he wanted it to. He felt terribly ashamed again. This stair training will improve his mobility, plus it would quickly improve his agility. The demon stood in the distance, watching the boy's efforts with a smile. With a special magic technique, he would be able to use magic while moving. Before, he was wrong in that he was only concentrating on steps. For example, he can't write while talking. In musical terminology, this is like a sound that overlaps another stronger sound. In battle, it's easy to control the body without controlling the brain. Gotta beat that, and he can use the body along with the mind. Looks like the kid's starting to realize something. He remembered the recent training with the princess. It's really hard to react to her quick attacks. She strikes faster than he can react. Ayers finally pulled himself together. All right, we gotta get back to practice. The kid's face was full of determination. The demon said that after this moment he would add, "There is sir" after every phrase. The demon began to command the guy to make this one move better. Excited shouts echoed in the air. The diligent training began. After a few minutes, the guy is exhausted. His legs won't stop shaking, and his head was spinning. A demon appeared out of nowhere and said that if he fell now, he couldn't win. He's testing a magical ladder that a demon invented. As always, his title is fantastically lame. Even after such a small load, he's in terrible condition. The guy thought his training would be a little better after all. Tamer told the boy to do these exercises daily as a warm-up. After that, they could work on body techniques. Ayers was shocked. What body techniques? He asked the demon when they were going to start working on the sword already. The one turned and looked at him with a surprised look. His father had always used a magic sword. Like him, Ayers had also always learned how to use the magic sword. The demon hesitated and said that they wouldn't work on the magic sword skill. He said honestly the kid has no talent for it. Ayers looked at him shocked. There was a look of incomprehension in his gaze. How could he? He had trained his whole life to work with a sword, hadn't he? The guy's eyes went wide with surprise. This couldn't be happening. The demon continued, he said when he first met the boy. He immediately realized that this fighting style did not suit him. Hero's magic sword attacks a single target using a lot of magical energy. It can only be done if one possesses outstanding magical abilities. The demon's voice was serious and cold. The kid didn't have any of those. Ayers looked shocked in Demon's direction and didn't say a word. He couldn't believe those words. The poor man collapsed to the ground, unmindful of his grief. He began to sob quietly. His breathing became labored and his heartbeat quickened. He slouched his gaze. For almost 15 years, he had been practicing sword fighting since he was a child. It's like something inside him shattered. Everything he'd done for 15 years was for nothing. He began to remember all the grueling ball workouts he'd had to endure. It was all for fun. He lowered his head. The guy was completely broken. Everything he'd done all this time had been for nothing. Been watching him for the last couple days. The guy was already half-heartedly listening to him. He was completely consumed with grief. He has a strength that his father does not possess. It's flexibility. He needs to inherit another from the family of heroes. His mother, the priestess Mary. The boy was stunned listening to all this. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His talent isn't in swordsmanship, it's in bodily technique. The demon's words sounded confident. If he began to develop these abilities, he could soon defeat even Hero. Ayers couldn't believe his ears. His eyes widened to the extreme. This is all impossible. Everyone will be very surprised, son of a hero, they use a sword. It's kind of nonsense. The demon looked at him in surprise. Didn't he like the idea? The guy shook his head negatively. Not at all. Show them all. It would be marvelous. But there was still some doubt in the boy's voice. but after a second he picked himself up and lifted a fist. He asked the demon to train him in a different way. In the voice of the guy heard the confidence in his own strength. He was ready to overcome any difficulties, just to prove to everyone his strength. Suddenly a maid approached him from behind. She asked him in surprise who he was talking to. Apes hadn't expected her to approach him so discreetly. He would have to come up with some excuse. Ayers frightened, he went back. The maid asked if the young gentleman was so lonely that he had made himself an imaginary friend. She looked at the guy in surprise. So that's why his bag looked so big. The girl let her head drop thoughtfully. Ayers stared at her, not even sure what to say to her. Suddenly the girl saw a ladder placed on the ground. She asked the guy, did he come up with this method of training himself? Ayers was quick to deny it. He said it was his imaginary friend's idea of me. His voice still sounded a little uncertain. Sadis didn't understand anything and just stared at the kid in surprise as expected of her. Did she understand the purpose of such an amusing training session? Ayers asked the girl what brought her here. She sort of twitched and started pulling some small roll of paper out of her bra. She said it was the menu for what the guy asked for. Only for next month, though. Ayers immediately blushed and shyly thanked her. The demon peeked out from his back and asked with interest, "What is it?" The two of them began to study the little scraps of paper with interest. There were quite a few gourmet dishes there. Demon noticed that it was quite a rich menu. The guy said that Sadis could cook a lot of different kinds of good food. Tamer said that's not what he meant. Sounds like she knows the nutritional value of the food and modifies it to make sure he gets as much as he needs. She must care a lot about the guy's health. The demon could tell just by looking at the menu. This girl lost her family during the war with the Demon King. Her mother Irza protected her, once on the verge of death, and they had lived together ever since. The memories of bygone days surfaced in his boy's mind. He ran up to his parents and wanted to brag about his accomplishments. But they smiled and said they had to go to dinner. The kid was upset that he couldn't socialize with his family properly. His mother said they'd be late, so he should go to bed. The door slammed and the kid was left alone with himself. He lowered his head and stared at the floor. Suddenly, a gentle female voice called out to him. A beautiful young girl appeared from around the corner. It was Sadis. He showed her his diary and she appreciated how hard he tried at school. The guy was shocked. It was the first person to appreciate his efforts. She knelt down in front of him and joyfully said that they would celebrate it today. She would even make a nice treat. The little child couldn't believe that he was finally getting this kind of attention. Sadis was a substitute for his parents, whom he never saw at home. They weren't blood-related, but she was like a sister to him. No, more than a sister. The demon leaned over and told him in his ear that he should tell her what he felt. The girl anxiously asked him, "Isn't that what he wanted here?" Suddenly the boy cried out loudly. He ran up to the girl with confidence and said in a loud voice that he would win the tournament in 2 months. In his voice you could hear the full confidence in his actions. The girl sighed and looked at him in surprise. Ayers continued to collect his thoughts. The guy yelled loudly that he wanted the girl to date him soon, and let him touch her tits. Hearing this, the girl made a disgruntled grimace. Immediately, her gaze turned cold. Hearing that, the demon even got cold. After a second, the kid seemed to come to his senses and started apologizing. It was a mistake, he didn't mean it. The girl started snorting and missed her head. These things should be done in stages, besides, it's a girl too often for that kind of attitude. The boy began to hiccup with fear as if he'd seen a demon. The girl had turned from pretty to monstrous in the blink of an eye. Ayers kept mumbling words of apology under his breath. In a cold voice, the girl said that this request was utterly repulsive to her. Ayers stood, wiping away tears with a small fist. He'd said too much, and now he wouldn't get away with it. The maid turned away and thought to herself that the bastard had declared that he would win the tournament. For a second, she was stunned, but good. The girl agreed that if he, the asshole, could win the tournament, he could touch her breasts all day long. She said it like she had to. The guy couldn't believe what he was hearing. She turned away and walked swiftly in the opposite direction, throwing only one word in parting. Ayers, after all this, fired up even more to win this tournament. Tamer blanched. He had said himself that his motivation should be dirty after all. He agreed to me, though, all right. He'll win the tournament and he'll get his bust. Tamer couldn't believe what he was saying. At this point, the guy was beyond happy. Ayers is about to become the worst thing on earth, and will lose Sadis. Demon excitedly said they will continue to warm up. He began to back over the boy. his voice taking on an evil note. He told the boy to fight him in a womb-like voice. The boy couldn't believe it. How? He couldn't fight the Demon King himself. Tamer pondered. Ghosts, shadows, and sparring. He would call it phantom sparring. The demon was extremely pleased with his ingenuity. The little boy looked at him in surprise. You mean they're not really going to fight now? The demon nodded affirmatively. That's exactly how it's going to be. Ayers' eyes lit up with excitement. This should be exciting. He was ready for any challenge to reach his ultimate goal. Until now, he had only had friendly duels in school. Moreover, the opponents were either too weak or it was that awful princess. Because of the strong skill difference, there was no use in it. Well now, things would be different. The kid slanted his eyes to the side. Truth be told, there were still some terrible competitors. Anyway, he figured it would be at least fun to fight a Demon King. Tamer, as usual, looked down at him, crossing his arms over his chest. He was in a rather serious mood. The demon said to make sure he doesn't fly around too much during the fight, and will fight as usual. He doesn't mind the guy using magic. The guy asked if he could hit him in his ghost form. After all, up until now, his movements had just passed through the guy's body. The demon grinned wryly. This question amused him. Who does the kid think he is? He's a great Demon King. With his power, he can do it. His face transformed, taking on an insane expression. This demon is not used to joking around. The boy imagined the demon impaling him with its sword, blood spurting in all directions. He shrank back from the rhinestone, the thought frightening Ares more than a little. The demon only smiled, looking over his shoulder, and asked what was wrong. He managed to read the guy's mind in 1 second, and he actually asked, "Did the guy think I had just punched him in the throat?" How did he read his mind? He couldn't touch him, could he? Ayers held his throat. His neck even ached from such thoughts. He'd just imagined it, and Demon had already figured it out. Death by a pierced neck was only his imagination. The horrible image of him bleeding to death from a deep cut on his neck was again in his mind. The boy's legs gave out and he fell to his knees. His whole body trembled with fear. He still couldn't shake the thought that the demon could kill him at any moment. I thought he only imagined it. The feeling of death, he can't stop thinking about him. The demon looked at him and grinned. Is that all he can do? A hint of contempt and sarcasm could be heard in his voice. Is this the son of a hero? Ayers was boiling with anger again, unimaginably pissed off by that phrase. He gritted his teeth and opened his eyes as far as he could. The boy rushed at the demon with screams. He tried to hit him, but his hands only passed through the ghostly body. Tamer was dodging all of his attacks. He threw himself at him like an unwary child. It was beginning to slowly irritate him. He waited a moment while the demon was focused on his fist. The kid swung around as hard as he could, trying to kick it with his foot. But the demon saw it all and held up 2 fingers. Right in front of Ayers' eyes, he barely had time to stop the attack before the demon gouged out his eyes. Tamer suddenly looked at him carefully with his cold gaze. And why did he stop the attack? Or was it just instinct? After all, one more step and death awaited him. The demon's long, sharp claw was only a few millimeters from his pupil. Ayers bounced to the side and with his hand out in front of him began to use his spell. He shouted a mega thunder spell and a magic sigil appeared in the sky right above the demon. Lightning bolts began to burst out of the guy's hands. It was just a distraction. As long as the demon couldn't see him, the guy swung his foot in to hit him. But suddenly a large rift began to appear under the demon's feet. It began to plunge inward rapidly. Before Ayers could even realize it, he was standing all alone, staring at the rift. The demon was gone, and where was he now? He noticed the demon had soared upwards and was now flying directly above him. This wasn't good. Something had to be done about it. The boy gritted his teeth and braced himself for the inevitable. Tamer started to go down behind the guy. Just when he thought the guy would attack smartly, he used another straightforward attack again. Pretty much everyone uses earth magic after thunder magic. It's elemental after all and easy to read. The demon looked disdainfully at the guy. He had easily figured out his attack. The demon hid his eyes under half-closed eyelids and a slight smile flickered on his lips. That wasn't bad. Anyway, the words perhaps reflected his peaceful acceptance of what had happened. Tamer stretches his hands forward, and the writing emphasizes the intent to teach something. Behold first. In that case, let this also be a lesson to you. In a dystopian world where darkness melds with light, Ayers stands face to face with Tamer, a powerful demon whose eyes glitter with challenge. How strong is the Demon King? The question hovering in the air seems to taunt fate itself. Somewhere in a quiet room on a snow-white bed, a soft whisper is heard. I want to sleep. These are the words of a girl whose anxiety echoes through the lush interior, reflecting her hidden fears. She clutches her pillow tightly, her eyes filling with tears. Makes sense considering what happened today, she thinks, trying to calm her troubled heart while the day's events continue to agitate her mind. Sitting at her desk in the privacy of her office, the girl reminisces about the time when she was a little girl, her words full of nostalgia, telling of days left behind. I had a very real dream, she continues, drifting off into a world of memories where the boundaries between reality and reverie blur. A glance through the window reveals a world where children's laughter and joy play with the rays of the sun. Bats! The sound of a ball hitting the glass as if urging her to return to those carefree days. And here she is, remembering the games under the sound of the trees, where each of us was the hero of our own story. With little heroes, these words make her smile in spite of adult cares, for in every heart lives the warm light of childhood dreams. A girl stands at the window, her gaze fixed on the sky. Who pulled me into my dream? Her words complete the thought, painting a picture of an imaginary escape into a dream world where anything is possible. Knock, knock, knock. A knock on the door brings her back to reality, where she is not just a girl with dreams, but a princess with responsibilities. Her gaze reflects a mixture of anxiety and determination. Sorry to disturb you, come in. She responds to the servant as she prepares to face the real world that awaits beyond the threshold of her room. In this world, she will have to be not only a dreamer, but a person in action. The princess's gaze is full of anxiety and expectation. Princess, a letter has come for you, says the servant, holding out a sealed envelope. This, the princess whispers, touching the seal with a flower on it. She feels that this letter could change her fate. The princess's gaze is fixed on a majestic building hidden among the shady trees. The sunlight plays on its walls, and time seems to stand still, waiting for her decision. In a clearing where the grass whispers secrets to the wind, Ayers rests, his breathing synchronized with the natural world. Ha, ha. Tamer, his demonic companion, watches him with a slight chuckle. That seems a bit much. Lying down, Ayers ponders his path, his gaze lost in the clouds. We must train like this daily. Reward with classes on the stairs. He acknowledges his own limitations with regret in his voice. I couldn't throw a single punch. Tamer is in full alert, his words full of disappointment. He didn't even use any special techniques. His next line is full of sarcasm. Only physical techniques that humans can repeat. Ayers, overcome by fatigue and pain, lies immersed in his thoughts. Beaten, pierced, and hung. The words of self-criticism echo in his head. In my head, I kept getting beaten over and over again. He recognizes his weaknesses, but does not lose hope. I used to be a little proud of myself. Ayers' words reflect his unwavering spirit. I thought I could hold out like this for a while. He stubbornly holds on to his goal. Though I couldn't handle the princess, I could still defeat the others. Ayers, still on the ground, tries to explain his feelings. No, I just never realized how weak I really am. Tamer, watching him, asks a question. What is it? Are you in despair over your helplessness? I'm so helpless, Ayers admits, as if confirming Tamer's words. Ayers continues his monologue. A thought flashed through my mind, as I sat there disappointed in myself. His thoughts are swirling in a whirlwind of self-deprecation. Suddenly he remembers something important. My father defeated you once. This thought strikes him as witty, for it brings a drop of hope. In a clearing where shadows roam among the trees, Ayers says with renewed inspiration, well, with the power of other heroes. He recognizes his past failures. His words are full of sadness. I have already been pseudo-killed by a ghost several times. In his next statement, there is determination. But unlike me, in a real battle, I would have died. I would definitely die. Tamer, looking down at him, asks the question, you really don't know anything about Hero. But Ayers is not discouraged. He contrasts his failure with his father's story. But still, how did my father manage to defeat you? Ayers replies with some awkwardness. Well, my dad's always busy. He continues, seemingly trying to justify his ignorance. When we talk in person, I listen. It turns into a lecture and stories about his past. Tanar, with a note of irony in his voice, asks, Do you really listen closely to all his boasts? Tanar utters with a teasing chuckle. So much for grief. He continues, offering Ayers a different perspective. On the outside, Hero is indeed a hideous individual, but Tanar's next line is left unspoken as if he wants to leave room for reflection. The scene shifts to the heroic image of Ayers' father, the path he traveled to defeat the Demon King. By no means was it easy, Tanar concludes, recognizing the difficulties Ayers' father has faced in the past. Ayers looks off into the distance, the demon's voice full of reflection. The story of how Hero became a hero is one you should know. The boy shares his thoughts. For me, my father has always been nothing but a source of complexes. Tanar speculates about generations. Whether wisdom or aging from an older generation is useful or not depends. Ayers continues, expressing his attitude toward the past. Our generation was the phrase he hated most. Tanar looks at Ayers with understanding. You too. The boy expresses his thoughts on growing up. But right now, the longing that adults talk about, I understand what they went through. Two silhouettes, a guy and a demon, are sitting in a clearing in the forest. The boy asks him to tell him about his past if the demon doesn't mind. He really wants to know more about him. Tanar turned away from him, a fleeting smile flashing across his face. How humanity had been able to turn on the Demon King himself. Guys was very curious to know that, after all, this was his past. The city was bustling with activity. A lot of people were once again back and forth hurrying about their business, and not even paying attention to each other. The city lived its normal daily life. Ayers was whining again about his feet hurting badly. The demon was greatly displeased with such behavior. Indeed, he is a spoiled rich child. He's so weak, and with this kind of effort, how is he going to train further? Yesterday, all they'd done was sparring and stair exercises. The boy muttered to himself under his breath that was enough. Suddenly, someone clicked him from outside. He turned to the direction from which he had been called, and there was a girl standing near his shop. The guy called out to her, not realizing who was standing in front of him. But after a second, he pulled himself up and apologized. There stood Princess Fiona. She was apparently picking out her breakfast. The girl said in surprise that it was strange for her to see him here in a place like this. The guy confirmed, yes, it is unusual, but she usually rides in a carriage too. So what happened? He looked her over from head to toe in surprise. She's alone without an escort. What was that in her hands? He looked with interest at the small purse the girl was holding carefully. The girl was frightened for a second and tried to explain herself, but the guy and the demon only looked at her perplexed. What the hell happened to her? Trying to guffaw, the girl said that the fruit juice in this shop was the most delicious. It felt like she was hiding something. The girl took a glass of juice with a trembling hand. Her voice gradually changed to a hysterical scream. She said that this cup was empty because she had just drunk it all, not because she'd been waiting for it all morning. That girl was the worst liar of all. Next, the three of them walked on. Fiona said that since they'd met, they could go to school together. The boy agreed. In other words, she was waiting in ambush for him. With interest in the voice, the girl asked what his plans were after graduation. The guy honestly said he didn't have any special plans. He tried to play it off and said it was no big deal. The girl started talking quietly. She said she'd been thinking about it the other day. You could see she was struggling with each sentence. In a sad voice, she began to speak. Guy knows that the graduation tournament isn't just a friendly battle, doesn't he? Many townspeople and important people will be there. In her case, since she is a princess, she will be announced as the next queen. Suddenly, the girl became sad. A girl asks, why does the guy know how she feels all the time? Her classmate said she was easy to understand. The demon had been hovering silently beside them the whole time. Tanar raised his profile questioningly upward as if anticipating a lie. The boy glanced stealthily in his direction. The girl continued. She was expected as a princess to one day rule the country like a queen. Even from childhood, she had been raised that way. One could imagine how hard it was for her to live under such conditions. Fiona is different from him, after all. The motivation of one of them is just Sadis's breasts. The girl continued to embarrass herself even more. Apparently, she wanted to say something. She couldn't excessively embarrass herself. She started to speak and immediately blushed with embarrassment and shame. Yesterday, when he stared at her in class, her sentence was unfinished. The girl was still gathering her thoughts. "That was right, wasn't it?" the girl asked him, gathering all her strength into a fist. The boy sighed. He supposed that yes, it was. The demon looked at him in surprise. Fiona continued to nervously rub the collar of her clothes. In that case, the girl's voice suddenly became confident. She quickly blurted out that she would win at the graduation tournament. And then the guy and the townspeople. She would be publicly announced to her. The boy looked at Fiona in surprise. He tried to make sense of all that had been said. In his heart, he understood and wanted to tell the girl to do her best. He would answer something like that. The guy apologized to the girl. She looked at him in surprise. What was he apologizing to her for? Ayers said with the same confidence in his voice that he was going to beat her. Yesterday's training had helped him realize his true potential. And now he was determined to win the tournament. He couldn't believe he was saying it out loud. He had never expected such determination from himself before. All he's doing is showing his good side to Sadis and the others. That's understandable. He just wants to impress the girl. On top of that, the guy really wants to know about his father's past. To do that, he has to win. He can't just give up. The boy's voice made itself incredibly determined. Fiona looked at him with astonishment. In all the time she had studied with him at the academy, she had never noticed such a thing about him. The girl asked, "Is this his confession to her?" The guy kind of twitched and came to his senses. I, him by whom else, instantly blushed. He hadn't expected this of himself. He replied that it was. And what was wrong with that? He mustn't let this girl find out about his sadist deal. She didn't seem to care. Fiona faded her gaze and began to look away. Her cheeks turned red as well. The boy's speech seemed to have embarrassed her. She said that in that case they would fight earnestly. The girl's eyes were determined. She looked at her friend and smiled with a full mouth. The boy smiled back at her as well. At this time, the demon was only watching from the sidelines. He didn't think the two of them were thinking the same thing. It made him look sad. Tamer stood to the side, folding his arms and grinning lightly. "It looks like it's going to be fun, though, so I'll continue to keep quiet." His indifference caused a whisper amongst those present. Ayers and Fiona stepped over the threshold of the school together, pondering the latest news. Fiona was visibly agitated. "What?" Without hiding her surprise, the girl shrieked, "Really?" Her voice trembled with surprise. "It can't be!" Emotions overwhelmed her. She tried to put what she had heard into her head. Ayers was silent, remembering the princess, her smile, her laughter. But his face instantly turned pale as he realized his mistake. "I forgot," he whispered, covering his face with his hand. The secret he was supposed to keep was now in danger. Ayers stopped at the edge of the schoolyard, his gaze fixed on a group of students chatting merrily amongst themselves. Thoughts swirled in his head, which he tried to push away. "No, I'm just trying not to think about it," he said gloomily, feeling the weight of the day ahead. Amidst the hustle and bustle at the entrance of the school, yet she girl was smiling, her face full of hope and optimism. "Oh, another permag on my way," Ayers whispered under his breath, believing in the best and preparing himself for the new challenges this day would bring. The day was in full swing, and the students, full of the joy of the school day, were laughing and making noise as they came out of the school gate. There was one boy among them who waved happily. "Hey, people, I'm home." His cheerful mood contrasted with the pensive expression on the face of another boy who stood nearby, who was walking among the crowd, immersed in his thoughts. "I'm home." The words echoed in his head, reminding him of something important that lay ahead. In the schoolyard, Ayers met Fiona, who seemed to be looking for something. "You guys," she began, but the words stuck in her throat when her gaze met his. "No, not about one barrier." Ayers interrupted her, hinting at the invisible barriers between them that they both felt but couldn't explain. The school stood majestically, its ancient walls holding the wisdom and secrets of the past. It was a witness to their silent struggles, dreams, and fears that they carried with them as they walked its corridors. In class, under the stern gaze of her teacher, Fiona struggled to focus on the lesson. It's study time, you should be concentrating, the governess reminded her. But, Fiona began, feeling the importance of her role as princess and the weight of her future responsibilities clashing with her desire to live an ordinary life. A voice was heard in the school hallway. Fiona? She turned around, hoping to see her friends, but it was just the echo of her name reflected by the walls. Suddenly, the classroom door swung open and the teacher appeared in the opening. Hey, wait. Come back here, she shouted after Fiona, who ran out laughing. Princess, this is not befitting. The governess began indignantly, standing on the steps of the school, but Fiona was already far away, enjoying moments of nonchalance with Ares, who was waiting for her outside. Fiona, laughing and bouncing merrily, ran outside, not noticing the governess's indignation. You're all being, again, the latter began. But the princess was too absorbed in her freedom to listen. Her friends were already waiting for her in the courtyard, among them Ares. They were discussing plans for the day, happily tossing around ideas and jokes as the teacher continued to grumble in their direction. The princess has to study now. You can't distract her. If you don't stop being naughty, I'll tell your fathers everything, threatened the governess. But her words were lost in the merry voices of the children, who were already plotting their innocent plots in the bright sunshine of the after-school day. The children armed themselves with sticks and branches, turning the schoolyard into a battlefield of their fantasies. So this counts as learning, exclaimed one of them, keeping the playful spirit alive. Fiona is one of us neo-heroes, added the boy, reinforcing her determination to be not only a princess, but also part of their small but brave team. The governess looked at them sternly. I'll never give her to someone who looks like the demon king of Celtic mythology, she declared, staring at one of the boys who was playing the role of an imaginary enemy. You'll never be a hero like your father if you act like this, she continued, turning to Ares, who smiled despite the rebuke, confident in his dream of surpassing expectations and becoming the hero he had always dreamed of. The children continued their game, each taking on a role. Fu is the best magician in the world. Rival is the best swordsman. Fiona is the best shield sorcerer, they announced, allowing everyone to feel a part of something great. Ares shouted out enthusiastically, I'm going to be the next hero in the world. That's why I'm going to surpass my daddy. He was determined to become stronger and better, not only in their little adventures but also in real life. Adults might consider it just child's play, but for them it was more than that. It was an opportunity to dream and believe in their own abilities. It's just a story from childhood. Oh, in that case, future hero, you'll have to defeat the evil Sadist now, Sadist joked, teasing Ares, who was already ready to accept any challenge. Fiona held Ares back. The boy admitted to himself, surrounded by friends, one day I too would have power like my father. His voice was gentle but full of determination. Ares stared into the distance, his face reflecting incomprehension and fear. I had no doubts then, he thought, remembering those carefree days of childhood. The boys walked together, laughing and joking, while Ares dreamed of a future full of heroism and adventure, not knowing that a harsh reality awaited me. Ares stood in the shadows, noticing the noisy crowd around him. What's going on in there? He involuntarily blurted out as he saw his friends surround Fiona. Oh, His voice sounded a note of disappointment, realizing that his childhood dreams of heroism were slowly fading before the reality of adulthood. The children of a family of heroes, just like me and Fiona and my childhood friends, he thought, looking around at every familiar face that reminded him of the past. Among the crowd, Rival stood out with his confidence. One who influenced rival Janetti. Ares looked thoughtfully at his friend, who seemed to be in his element, enjoying the attention and the competitive atmosphere. The son of one of a family of heroes, a master swordsman. His Vadanche, my even skill surpasses doubt that he is the strongest in the academy. Ares's thoughts were filled with admiration and a bit of envy for Rival's success. Amidst the noise and laughter, Fu stood spreading his arms in a wide grin. And the one lower than Fu, the younger one? He proudly announced, savoring his moment of glory. The son of one of the family of heroes, a great mage. He's by far the best mage in the academy, he added, confident in his powers and abilities. Tanar looked at Ares with bewilderment and slight concern. Study abroad? He asked, He asked as if not believing that their paths could part. They wrote letters saying they were tired of foreign schools, but they returned so quickly. Returning home was not as easy as it seemed at first glance. No. Why did the princess say no? Everyone was shocked when they found out that Fiona wouldn't accept the offer to study abroad. Usually the children from the first 2 places in each school are offered to study abroad, they explained. But Fiona chose a different path, staying true to her home and friends, which made the story even more unusual. Tamer, hiding his excitement under a mask of mockery, tossed to Ayers. In other words, your poetry zeroed out of second place. His tone was playful, but he also felt a shadow of the defiance inherent in demons. Suddenly the boys were called out. Ayers seemed to go cold, and Fiona looked forward with a serious look. They walked straight down the cobblestones towards their old friends. The boy said there was no need for formalities. They were childhood friends, didn't they remember? Fuz Adorno said that the guy hasn't changed at all. Another friend of his asked with a sneer, that he had become wantonly stronger. The guy turned away and mumbled something to himself under his nose. He didn't want to admit his failures. Fiona said in a serious voice that Ayers was the kind of guy who always went to lessons and training. He still can't get over her, though. When he heard that, the boy was horrified and made a grimace of displeasure. He was terribly embarrassed that a girl in front of his old friends had humiliated him like that just now. He didn't know where to put his shame. The girl went to her old friends and said that she had heard that there were some difficulties while studying abroad. Fu scratched the back of his head and said that a pack of 5 dragons had suddenly arrived. He and Rival fought them along with the suppression troops. It went really well. They even got a medal for it. The guy started bragging about his accomplishments, and everyone expressed their admiration for their achievements. At this time, Ayers just stood on the sidelines, enviously watching it all. He was terribly embarrassed and ashamed. Demon noticed that the children of the 7 heroes were all grown up and surprisingly different, but they are all popular. Ayers grimaced again and told the demon not to look at him when he said that. One of the students asked the newly arrived Fu to show them what he had learned abroad. His voice was full of enthusiasm and genuine interest. Everyone was curious to know what these children had learned while studying abroad. Fu got shy. Should he show it right now? And he felt kind of embarrassed. Everyone wanted to see the disciples' new abilities. The demon and his companion stood far away and listened irritably to all the cheers of admiration. The boy brushed it off. He had no choice anyway. But don't let anyone expect anything incredible. His voice was somehow frightened and even embarrassed. He seemed uncomfortable with so much attention. In an instant, the guy swung his hand and used an incredible spell called Tongue of Flame. A huge table of flame burst out of his hand. Ayers couldn't believe his eyes. It was some kind of stunning progress. The demon just silently watched it all. Apparently, it didn't surprise him at all. People started looking out of the windows. They were also interested and wanted to see what this incredible power was. Everyone was just shocked. The bright light took up all the available space. This show left no one indifferent. What is that? A low-level spell? What about a mega-level spell? It's going to be unbelievable. Everyone around him was shocked. No one expected to see such a stunning performance. But apparently Fu was not happy with his performance. He just stood there and stared silently ahead. Then he turned around and asked, embarrassed, had he disappointed them? There was some embarrassment in his voice. After a second, the crowd began to scream with delight. It was amazing, so much so that they were stunned with shock. Fu froze in place. He was startled by this reaction and began to shake his whole body. Ayers enviously thought to himself, this magic is really admirable. What the hell kind of sarcastic tone is that? Rival stood next to him, irritated. He said that this frivolity pisses him off. He watched it all from the sidelines and didn't realize. Could it really be called unexpected? Suddenly he turned to the guy and asked him to let him say something to him. Ayers looked at him in surprise. In a cold voice, the long-haired guy began to speak. They studied abroad for a year and came back with absolute skills. You could hear the metal in the guy's voice. He said that this year there was no way Ayers was going to beat them. Ayers grinned, trying to hide his embarrassment. He said that Rival was pretty cold during the magic demonstration. What about him himself? The boy fell silent and bit his lip. Suddenly he pulled out a huge sword and tossed it into the air. Is that curiosity, Ayers? The guy opened his eyes in surprise. Observe this awesome weapon. Turning in the other direction, The guy threw in a farewell that showing people at the academy his skills was a waste of time. Rewal asked, "Does the guy understand why they graduated and came back home? It's all about competing in the royal tournament. And win." His voice became as serious as possible, even sinister. This guy had no intention of losing. They are the children of the 7 heroes, the ones who will inherit their place. His voice sounded as proud as possible. No, not those who will surpass them. They will be known in all countries. And Rival decided to dedicate his victory to this man. Ayers sighed heavily. His speech had made a great impression on him. He figured it wasn't just a battle with Fiona in a tournament. He had no chance of defeating these people, not then, and not now. Suddenly, Fiona herself approached them. The girl was determined. In a serious voice, she said that she could not let them do this. Everyone was surprised that she had come. The girl looked at them seriously, determination glittering in her eyes. She recognizes that these people learned a lot while studying abroad. But the girl was not sitting idly by either. She approached them with a confident step. Rival looked at her sidelong with some disdain. She said she wouldn't give him this victory. Stammering, the boy began to speak. He said that the princess was undeniably strong, but he wasn't going to give in to her either. It looks like there's going to be a personal conflict between them soon. Rewal, in a stammering tone, said that when he wins the tournament, he wants to ask for her hand in marriage. He knelt down in front of her. The girl was stunned by such a bold act and just stared at him with her huge eyes. Seeing and hearing this, everyone else became ecstatic. Ayers almost choked. Rival and the princess? He couldn't believe it. When did this guy become such a personality? The girl stammered that she considered him her friend. The guy replied that he knew that one. He knows what her heart is in and what she feels. He's seen it by watching her. All this time, Rival has seen the way Princess Fiona always looks at Ayers. The guy at the time just stared perplexed at the whole thing. He didn't understand what was going on. What's the point of this show? Rival, meanwhile, was asking the girl to give him just one chance. A chance to become a man in her eyes. Ayers looked really annoyed at this time. Well, if the Swordmaster's son and the princess get married, the world won't complain. Ayers gritted his teeth in anger and mentally wished them the best of luck in his most sarcastic tone. The demon appeared beside him and gave a fake groan. "Even if that guy can't win, don't you agree?" Demon's words sounded like a challenge. He could read minds, so he knew what the guy was thinking at that moment. Ayers raised his head upwards and asked Demon in an annoyed voice. Did he really see that, didn't he? Demon only crossed his arms over his chest and watched. That's magic power stopping right next to his eye. He won't be able to stand up to these guys. And then what? Also in their accomplishments was defeating the fire dragon. They were many times stronger than him. There was no way he could compete with them. Mega-level magic isn't that enough. Staying in another country for a year. The guy was getting more and more discouraged, realizing how insignificant he was. But the demon didn't seem to be impressed. He said it was just child's play. The offspring of the hero family would be puzzled to hear how he defeated the Dragon King in the underworld. The demon laughed. Indeed, he had no equal. Ayers didn't know what he was talking about. He had never heard such words before. The demon continued to rage. With all his knowledge, 2 months of lessons would carry more weight than hundreds of years in a different school. Tamer crossed his arms over his chest in satisfaction. He told the boy to just believe in him. The demon sounded confident in his words. Surprised, looked up at him from below. The demon smirked and asked the boy, "Whose apprentice is he after all?" There was a sneer in his words. At this time, Rival kept trying to get Fiona's heart. But the girl persistently resisted. Ayers called out to him. He ironically apologized for interrupting their joy. But he was going to be the one to win. The boy shouted it confidently, and was even frightened by the power of his voice. The demon said he would give him advice, for that was the price he had to pay. The boy wondered, is this a demon contract? Going to announce the guy's goals to give up all avenues of escape, to make him feel the need to do so and never give up. The boy swallowed down the heavy saliva. He had no other way if he wanted to win the tournament after all. After saying that, Rival turned to the boy and gave him a disdainful look. So he's going to participate in the tournament too. Ayers was brimming with determination. There is something he can't give up either. When the crowd heard that, the crowd went wild with renewed vigor. It appeared a duel between the two boys was about to take place. It was very interesting. No one would miss it. Ayers couldn't believe what he'd just said. He turned his head the other way and tried to come to his senses. At this time, Fiona was sitting in the corner, almost crying. What was this nonsense? She could have sworn that there would be rumors now, after she failed to gauge the mood of the situation. The girl was shaking with fear and embarrassment. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Urs had stopped Rival. It was impossible. The girl's thoughts were confused and she couldn't put them in order. Fiona didn't know who she should support, since both guys were her childhood friends and she appreciated them equally. Tamer, meanwhile, was only watching with interest. He was enjoying the whole spectacle immensely. Urs looked back, glaring at his companion. Rival was looking at him with a sizzling gaze and slowly boiling with anger, but he didn't show it. This guy was ruining his plans after all. Another lesson was going on in the school. All the students were sitting diligently, writing something in their notes. The teacher stood at the blackboard and drew some complicated formulas. The demon was bored out of his mind. This was a lesson for the Empire's rising elite. This was some very low level. Urs turned around and irritatedly asked him what the hell was he talking about. Demon spit, he only tells the truth. He thought, what's the point of writing down examples on paper and solving them? The guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, it's just a regular class. The demon said that if AHE had even the basic skills to use it, all he has to do is substitute the numbers and do the automatic counting. The guy didn't understand what automatic counting was. It's better to see once than to hear 100 times. The demon said they should see. They should learn the new magic first. The kid looked at him in surprise. To learn it, he would need to draw a magic symbol. Urs quickly began to draw it on the paper. Next, just let him repeat after him. The demon began to cast the spell. After a few seconds, the mastering was already complete. It was his own invention. The ultimate in computational magic. Millions of formulas that could be solved in seconds immediately began to appear in the guy's head. Before I even blinked an eye, I had already written the exact answer to the assignment. What the hell was that? The demon just chuckled quietly from afar. He was very pleased with his invention. Add, calculate, multiply, divide. For any formulas referenced by the caller, the spell itself performs all calculations. Tamer made a solemn tone of voice. He said he named him. He made a dramatic pause and said he named him Counting. In addition, he also invented an auto-snooping gizmo. The guy wondered if he used this on the final test, he would definitely be able to pass it easily. It was amazing. Suddenly, the teacher's loud voice sounded. The teacher demanded that the boy write the answer on the blackboard. The boy woke up as if from a dream and was stunned. He walked over to the board and looked forward, now that everything was clear to him. A magical symbol formed near his eye and immediately started counting. Urs waved the hand that had the crayon in it and prepared to answer. Right now, there would be no difficulty for him. Now there was nothing he couldn't solve. The demon was just watching from afar. That's great. Now we need to get back to our seats. The boy was about to return to his desk when the teacher called out to him in a surprised voice. The instructor asked the guy, where are his actual calculations? Did he sneak a peek at the answer? Ayaz started making excuses, saying that it wasn't like that. Demon just chuckled from the sidelines. Being that devious didn't ring a bell in this boy's world. Yes, it was his mistake. After a moment's silence, the boy called out to Demon menacingly. Suddenly, they found themselves in some unfamiliar empty place. Trainer replied that they were now in the boy's mind. Fantasy magic, another type of magic that the demon invented. It's a spell that puts the subject into a dream and allows the caster to control the dream based on discretion. Dreams of world conquest, dreams of beautiful women, anything a man desires. It couldn't be more realistic. In other words, now during the dullest lesson, they can train in his mind. At this time, the real kid was just sleeping in class. So it's just his dream. He pointed his finger at the demon, so he wasn't real either. Just a figment of his imagination. Demon shook his head in the negative, but he was real. Hence, when he uses this spell, he falls into the same dream as the guy. That way, he can create anything he wants. With a snap of his fingers, the demon created a funny-looking bubble. It turns out that's how they're all together in the dream. Urs stood in the middle of this space and couldn't understand a thing. A half-naked girl appeared out of nowhere. He could use this place to flirt with sadies. One could even make an erotic dream. The boy began to dream. The demon said this spell could not be created without the host knowing what he wanted to represent. He has to be careful, after all. You can dream as much as you want with this method. It's quite addictive. In one country, the hero immersed himself in his own dreams. from real life, that as a result, the whole country was destroyed. Therefore, in the world of demons, magic fantasy was forbidden. Other than that, the demon can't do anything with its spirit body. His body began to catch fire. Ayers was frightened. He didn't realize what else this spell was. Traynor said that it wasn't a spell at all, but his magical power was radiating as an aura. He only allowed it to come out. The boy was scared out of his wits. He'd never even heard of such a thing. The demon said in a calm voice that it was only a small part of his ability. Now he decided to amplify it to the limit. A huge vortex was formed which filled all the available space. Smiling, the demon enthusiastically said that this was his special technique. The Great Demon Spiral. The spiral to break through the devil. Ayers shook with fear. He couldn't believe that the demon had come up with some lame name again. Why say spiral twice? I mean, it sounds weird. Traynor raised his spell upwards as if intending to attack. Ayers started apologizing immediately. He said he didn't mean it. The guy naively started to say that the Demon King's technique is delightfully cool, just as he expected it to be. In an instant, everything stopped and the guy fell face down. He already thought he was dead, terror glittering in his eyes. The demon shook his head. Of course it was true. If the technique was used on a human, he would be nothing but minced meat. Traynor told the boy not to lie down forever, but to finally sit down at the desk. Suddenly, a wooden school desk materialized out of nowhere. The demon, like a teacher, walked up to the blackboard and said that now they had something to discuss before they continued. This time, his voice became serious. Creatures such as demons and humans have a reservoir inside their bodies where magic is stored. That's where it's actually released and activated. But magic is released from the container through magical flows. Their quantity greatly affects the power of his magic. For example, the more holes in a bag of water, the more water will flow out. Similarly, if the body has little magical flow, mega-class spells can only be used at a fraction of their actual power. However, those with a lot of these magic streams would quickly run out of magic reserves. But it would be fine as long as he could keep the amount of magic consumed in his mind. A child born in a family of great magicians is likely to become a great magician himself, because he will have more magical flows. All this time, the boy listened attentively and absorbed every word. Traynor is right. Fu and Princess Fiona probably have more magic flows than him, which makes them superior to his settlement. It's just an innate talent. The demon continued to talk passionately. At the same time, the boy sat with his head down, seemingly frustrated. The demon drew some kind of magical symbol on the board in a human figure. He said that rather than just increase the guy's magical flows, the number of streams is not determined in advance, as there are closed streams of magic. The magic potential of a guy can be increased by opening those closed streams. Ayers jumped up from behind his desk and asked excitedly, "And how do we open these magical streams? Where did we think about it?" He had already strengthened many soldiers with this method. Ayers, how did he do that? The one only smugly smirked. Pausing for a moment, the demon said he did it with acupuncture. Hearing that made the boy feel cold inside. He knew exactly what the procedure was, and he wasn't happy about it. In front of him were some acupuncture supplies. There were some needles and a burning candle. Does he really need to stick this into his body? He looked at all of this unhappily. The demon said in a stern voice that of course he did. You can't do it without it. The guy was talking about how it's okay to stick them in himself. Is the demon sure it's safe? Traynor exhaled and said it wasn't a problem at all. It's got to be quick and gentle. He'd been practicing all weekend. Ayers gently took one of the little needles. With his vision, his sixth sense, he sees places of blocked magical flows. The guy has no problem getting into them. Ayers asked fearfully, "Does it hurt or not?" Traynor replied thoughtfully that the pain could be like sticking a needle under a fingernail. Hearing this, the boy screamed this disgust. He sure didn't want to hear that. The demon urged him to calm down. He only had one stream to open today. Ayers looked at his hand apprehensively. He didn't want to do that, because from the demon's explanation, the pain would be hellish, so there's no other way. He's up against a monster with an unrealistic level of magic. In order to defeat it, he might as well suffer a little pain. Ayers slowly and apprehensively began to bring the needle to his hand. All this time, the demon was guiding him. The needle was almost to the boy's wrist. He gritted his teeth and prepared to endure the pain. And it was the first time he'd ever done it, so it was scary. As soon as he stuck the needle in his wrist, Electrical impulses began to shoot out all over his arm, as if he had been electrocuted. His arm twisted and no longer obeyed him. What was that feeling? It was like needles were digging into his entire arm. It couldn't be. It was as if he was chained and at the same time had hot knives stabbed into his entire body. Traynor just watched silently from the sidelines. He didn't think the procedure was that painful. The pain was so intense that the boy reeled back and was already collapsing from his chair to the ground. Sadis's frightened cry came from far away. There was a bowl of water on the table and a wet towel. The guy sighed heavily. He could barely open his eyes. Something seemed to have gone wrong. He was lying in his bed, and the demon had been waiting for him the whole time. Noticing that the guy was finally awake, he turned his head in his direction. Demon said he couldn't handle the pain and immediately passed out. Right when that girl found him, his maid was sitting next to him. Sadis was sitting next to him, sound asleep. Her eyes were closed. Ayers shifted a weakened gaze in her direction. She had been taking care of him all this time. She was worried again. His body was still so weakened that he couldn't move, and a finger. Suddenly he saw something rather obscene. The girl's skirt pulled up and he saw her panties. The guy immediately turned away and blushed like cancer. No, he can't look at that. To do that after she took care of him. It was obscene, but he couldn't help it and still he looked back. But still he really wanted to see it, even if it was just a glimpse. He carefully turned his head back. Suddenly the girl woke up. It looked like she had been awake all this time. In a voice she asked, "Does he want to see the maid's panties?" The girl winked playfully at him. Ayers immediately jumped up from the bed and blushed as red as a tomato. And what was she awake for all this time? The girl said in a disdainful tone that it was a pathetic sight to look under the skirt of a girl who worked hard taking care of him. It's a disgrace. She moved even closer to him and took the boy by the chin, running her gentle hand over his face. She was so close that the boy could already feel the warmth of her body. Her voice gave him goosebumps. She moved closer, and he could feel her warm breath on his cheek. Suddenly his parents burst into the room. The boy didn't even realize it. His mother opened the door with her foot and screamed. Seeing the whole sight, the woman blushed with shame. She couldn't believe what was happening. Is her son courting that maid? Ayers blushed even more. Now he didn't know what to do. Sadis shamed the guy in a languid voice. What are the two of them doing here? The boy's father was furious. He was about ready to nail the little brat, but the only thing stopping him was Ayers' mother. She couldn't believe this was really happening. The woman shook the maid as hard as she could, trying to force the truth out of her. She didn't want to believe what was happening. The demon just watched in silence. What a bunch, one of Hero's 7 heroes. And one of the 7 heroes is the warrior priestess Mamu. They hadn't changed a bit in all this time. The boy snorted and looked at them with an annoyed look. The guy asked, "Aren't those two supposed to be at work right now?" Hearing this, the father swung around and gave the boy a swift kick in the ass. Almost crying, he asked, "Why did the father hit him?" The man replied in a stern voice. He was thinking something rude now, wasn't he? Ayers said a groan and said that he was hungry after all that. Hearing this, the maid smiled broadly. In that case, should she cook something for dinner? The boyfriend's mom said it's a great idea. In that case, she'll help her. The maid said she would be most grateful. Ayers. Along with his father, they were left alone in the room. It had been so many years since Ayers' mother had last cooked with her maid. At that moment, it was as if someone had hit the guy over the head. He felt terribly embarrassed. How could he look them in the eye after all this? It's unbearable. Traynor leaned over to him and whispered in his ear. Would the man like to ask his father something? He was clearly hinting at something. The boy remembered, that's right. He was going to ask him about his past, wasn't he? Ayers started to speak uncertainly. The man turned around when he heard his voice. Here, seeing the eyes, the boy timidly asked his father, why did he become an Imperial knight? There was embarrassment and fear in his voice. Stammering, the guy said it was time to pick a course. It just occurred to him. He didn't finish his sentence. Well, he seems to have played it well. The man hesitated. He said he wanted to protect his family and friends, but in reality, his mother and his hometown were almost destroyed by demons. Hearing this, the boy opened his eyes wide. Fields and stoyles were devastated, and many neighbors and their families were eaten alive. The man reminisced. He would have been eaten too if that man hadn't shown up there. Man thinks he would have died at that time. This man easily defeated a crowd of monsters. He left without a word, and he looked so cool walking off into the sunset. Hiro smiled and asked, "Isn't that a little too corny?" The man said it was just a childhood dream. Slightly rash, but still. Eyes wide open, Ayres listened to his father's every word. The door creaked open and the faces of his mother and the maid appeared behind them. It looked like they had been eavesdropping on them after all. Their eyes glistened with delight as they listened to the conversation between him and his son. Ayres had pondered all along that it could have been just a childhood dream. But his father was still able to make it come true. He was able to protect the world. The boy thought about it even while sitting at the dinner table. The guy started to talk awkwardly. He wanted to say about the graduation tournament. He's going to try to win. Hearing this, the man looked at him in surprise. The boy's mother heard it too and jumped up from the table, eyes wide with surprise. Her son said he wanted to win. She would do anything to support him. The woman seemed to have more enthusiasm than he did. But immediately the kid's spirits plummeted. His mother told him not to apologize for losing. They would be happy if he just tried. After saying that, the guy finally lost his morale. And why are they preparing for the fact that he's bound to lose? Even though he's desperately trying to win. That's it. He clutched the fork in his hands. From this day forward, it will not stop. Sadis looked back at him worriedly. She could see the worry in her eyes. The boy got up from the table, apologized, and said he just wasn't feeling well. Ayres stood up from the table, looking over his shoulder with a piercing look and the words, "Thanks for the food." The Demayan's eyes follow the lad's figure walking away into the distance, perhaps after a shared meal where they discuss the important parts of their life together. The next moment, Tamer finds Ayres in thought and asks worriedly, "Is everything all right? It's not every day you enjoy dinner with your family, is it?" Tamer tries to understand the reasons for his friend's concern, feeling their close bond. Ayres stands in front of Tamer with his head down and exclaims with a desperate expression on his face, "I want you to make me stronger." This confession reveals Ayres' deep inner conflict and his desire to grow, to become stronger, perhaps to meet or even surpass his family's expectations. Ayres, full of determination and emotion, declares, "I want to prove to everyone that I can win, not just in words, but in deeds." His desire not just to speak, but to act, emphasizes his desire for self-development and self-assertion. Tamer, standing back, says detachedly, "I put you to sleep." These words could mean that he used his demonic powers to help Ayres calm down or deal with something. Tamer says, "Weary training will only make you worse, and the strain of opening magical streams is too much too." This points out the difficulties and potential dangers in their world of magic and training. Ayres, confused, replies, So what?" And then, seemingly trying to understand the situation. Tamer reminds him, "Today and tomorrow are the weekend, though," perhaps suggesting a break or need for a break from training. This emphasizes Tamer's concern for Ayres' well-being. The kid tries to say something, but he stutters and can't gather his thoughts. Demon says tomorrow, the day he knows he'll get out here, which means the demon's gonna spend tomorrow reading. Guy nods his head, so it's a lock. The tournament's 50 days away. That's not a lot of time. Mother Ersa is hugging Hiro. She's so sorry, that day was a lifetime. She apologizes through her tears. Apologizes for not having time. The woman is pondering. She realizes that she can support her son. She looks at the child who is crying in surprise and with a kind of motherly love and care. She is very happy to have met this child. The woman clutches the baby's little fist in her hand, as if trying to protect it from all the troubles of the world. Ayres and the demon are standing outside a bookstore, where a man is loading some merchandise into a cart. Demon's eyes lit up with happiness. He had already given up hope that he would read the sequel to Fate, and now he could do it. The guy couldn't believe he'd actually bought the book. This is the same book the demon was talking about yesterday. He was getting sick of buying the sequel. He never thought he'd have to rent a cart to take all this stuff away. Trainer said excitedly that they should read all these books in this park, pointing finger toward the nearest public garden, soon rather than drag the cart to the bench. All this time, the demon watched his future treasure with a look of total admiration. Now that they'd bought up the whole house, he'd read the whole thing in one sitting. You could hear the admiration in the demon's voice. Ayres looked in his direction unhappily. Did the Demon King's eyes sparkle thanks to human literature? Which killed him, by the way. The demon shouted that culture had nothing to do with race. Rejection based on racial difference is just a human trait, and borrowing good ideas is the key to development. Demon's eyes were burning with happiness. He finally got what he wanted, and now fully immersed himself in reading this novel. Trainer was panting. He ordered the boy to leaf through the pages for him as his body was ghostly, and then let him tell him how he was doing. The boy sighed. Of course he would. He could hear the sarcasm in his voice. He sat down on a bench and put the book in his lap and began to read. At that moment, the demon over his shoulder was watching him. Suddenly, he called out to the boy. "Unhappy," he said. "The boy reads very slowly. Let him read faster." The boy was surprised. How could he read any faster? He's already reading as fast as he can. He started reading 30 seconds ago. The demon said he had already read the page 5 times. The guy wondered, why so fast? Maybe he was just flipping through the pages for him. He might not read it himself. The demon started to refuse. He can't let that happen. Guy should discuss it with him after reading it. Demon's eyes filled with pity. God, what was he in for? Guy had a premonition that he would spend the next few hours in agony. The demon sighed. In that case, he would teach him speed reading, since that was the case. The boy couldn't read any faster. He slanted an annoyed look at Demon. It was starting to irritate him a little. Trainer pointed a finger at his eye and said that all a guy needs is just visual acuity. The guy's thinking, and he's probably thinking about the wrong thing. The demon said visual acuity means dynamic visual acuity and peripheral vision. Dynamic visual acuity is the power to track moving objects. This involves increasing the strength of the eye muscles, which then increases the speed of eye movement. Therefore, this technique is directly related to the ability to read quickly. So it's only for reading? The guy said there's no point in learning such a specific skill, and said there's more to it than that. Dynamic visual acuity makes it easier to track fast movements. In other words, it makes it possible to avoid countless attacks. The boy did admit that the skill was quite useful in battle after all. Trainer smiled. He knew very well that he was right. Well now, peripheral vision comes into play. He continued to explain first. Let him look at that couple. He pointed his finger at the people who were sitting on a bench not far from them. 2 people were sitting on a bench cooing about something. Apparently they were 2 people in love. The guy sighed and mentally said that he wished they would die soon. Demonu sighed. This was definitely something he didn't expect. Enough, let the guy look away. Now have him say what color was the bench. How many people were in front of them? How many plants were growing behind them? The boy opened his eyes. He hadn't had time to notice all this. How could he know it? Confused, he said he hadn't been paying attention. The demon snorted. He thought so. Peripheral vision allows him to notice all objects in his line of sight. If he focuses on one thing, the rest will start to escape his attention. In a fight, he doesn't just look at his fists and sword, right? If he looks at his opponent as a whole, he can notice his preparatory movements before attacking, and thus seize the initiative. A technique he can learn. The demon paused. It's called a cannon. The demon's eyes widened, and the boy's surprised face was reflected in them. He finally remembered something. Ayers looked dumbfounded. Even if this guy looks ridiculous at first glance, this is solid evidence that it works. Thanks to terrorizing the stairs, his reflexes and agility have actually improved. Amazing. Would he have better control over his body? He literally started to feel the changes. This demon's techniques are really effective. Okay, the guy apologized for not taking him seriously. What should he do next? Trainer smiled with a full-mouth smile and nodded. He was pleased that the guy finally recognized his power. Smiling, he said that the goal for today would be to read this book to the end. The boy couldn't believe his ears. Would he really have to read this novel all day long? That's impossible, the boy shouted at the top of his voice. The demon said, accepting no other answer but yes, sir. There will be eye training first. The guy sighed and doomedly agreed. There was nothing to do. One just had to trust this demon. The little girl sat hidden from everyone and smiled with her mouth full. A woman approached the grocery store and the salesman asked, "Did Sadis run away from her again?" Yes, she had. The girl replied in a shy tone. This was her hometown. Where is this mischievous child? At this time, a little girl was laughingly peeking out from around the nearest corner. When the woman saw her, she rushed after the girl who was running away. Apparently it was her mom. The woman ordered the girl to stop fooling around, but she didn't listen and just ran away laughing. Sadis indulged in memories of the past. She didn't remember much. The girl lived in peaceful town with her dad and mom. She remembered being happy as a child. What happened in this town? How did that even happen? She had no idea about it. It's an ancient magic stored in the city. A forbidden skill capable of destroying even continents. An old man sat leaning against the wall, a heavy weight strapped to his leg, keeping him from leaving. Traynor was sitting on a desk in his room, throwing papers around. The humans had apparently overdone it. He said no one had any idea how destructive this spell was. The old man sat there unmindful of his fear. He gritted his teeth and tried to keep his temper in check. The man ordered the Demon King to shut up. It was their last hope against him. A hand grasped his hair, pulling him forcefully towards him. In a balaclava, said he was going to use this spell on their army by selling Peria. Looks like they were going to use it as a weapon of mass destruction. There are also tapes of secret meetings. The demon stood up from his desk. He didn't need it anyway. Normally he would just feed this man to his army. But this spell, it's too powerful. Traynor apologized, but he must destroy it. This magic. And this man who was the key. Little Sadis was walking through the city when suddenly she saw a huge demonic vortex that moved straight towards her, destroying everything in its path. The girl wouldn't have had time to run away anyway, so she just stood there and watched. The adult Sadie stood in the middle of the room and held a broom in her hands. Her eyes widened. She had indulged too much in memories and now had fallen a bit out of reality. Even after all these years, when she gets distracted, she remembers that day. The memories brought her unbearable pain, but she couldn't give them up because they were part of her life. She started yanking the handle of one of the doors, frantically trying to get in. Finally, she got to the room, and inside it were many portraits of little heirs. Seeing them, she began to snort contentedly and calm down a bit. The girl melted. The mere sight of him was enough to crack the very devil's heart. Sadis realized that she was now a maid in Regan's family. The girl's face spread into a satisfied smile. Her homeland was destroyed by the Demon King. Her mom saved her when she was on the verge of death. Actually, she should have been sent to an orphanage. This woman raised her like a sister. Her mom was like a sibling to her that Ona loved. She was a little sad when she married Hero, but the girl thought even harder. The man took her in as his adopted daughter. The man patted the girl's cheek and stroked her head. Also, the moment when she first saw her master surfaced in her memories, when the woman had given her the first time to support the little warm lump. The baby was incredibly cute. The girl looked at him with her huge eyes. Now this was her sweet little brother, albeit uneven. The girl cradled him in her arms too. A new life after her family died. She wished it could always be like this. Sadis took the small box, opened it with interest. It held so many memories. This ribbon was from the bouquet Urs had given her for her graduation. She remembered the young gentleman's sad face when he almost cried when he asked if she would leave them after graduation. The girl melted with delight and a wide smile spread across her face. She wanted to tease him, even though she knew it was wrong. She wants to pester him, wants to see his sweet side. To her young master, there's a young lord that Princess Fiona loves, and the people around here know it. If all goes well, the children of the 7 heroes will marry each other, and now she would see them off like everyone else. The girl thought about it sadly. But the young master going against all norms. If only he would look at her again just once. The girl remembered the way Ayers had looked at her the first time he'd given her a bouquet. She remembered those eyes. She brushed a tear from her face. She could never admit it to him. The girl remembered the moment when the young master came home from school upset, and she had greeted him joyfully as always. The girl's eye began to twitch. She realized something was wrong. Something while shopping. She couldn't find her place. Such a lecherous look for the young master. It was unusual for her to see the boy like that. The boy grasped some scrap of cloth and pulled it toward him. The maid watched his every move. He handed her a napkin and the girl thanked him heartily. At parting, Pauline said she would read the book until supper time. Let her call him when everything was ready. What's that? If he's a guy, he should have looked at the panties. But like a gentleman, he grabbed the scarf. She didn't even notice it. Like something had changed in the guy. He noticed her panties showing from beneath her skirt. That was the ability to notice everything in sight. So much for visual acuity. The boy cheered. What a useful skill. The demon sighed heavily. It wasn't allowed. He wasn't one to look up girls' skirts. However, the kid mastered it very easily. He's not as untalented as everyone thinks. Maybe he'll make something of himself in the future. It's amazing how fast he learns. Great demonic breakthrough evolution. Ayers stood in the middle of the courtyard looking up at the night sky. He was pensive, as if nothing in the world existed but himself. The kid looked at his hand, which began to slowly emit magic. A demon appeared from afar and said that he could now steadily control the magic around him. Ayers stood and half-turned to look at the demon. His whole body was covered with a magical aura. He could control it now, after his training, without any problems. Ayers, it was worth all the agony he had endured after all. During the opening of the magical streams. It wasn't all for nothing. It took a little time to learn how to materialize magic, but still it wasn't everything. Trainer asked, and how does it feel? The feeling of exemplary technique. It was delightful. The boy closed his eyes in surprise and pleasure. Everything he sees and hears seems natural. He is amazed at how clearly he perceives everything. The training has paid off after all. The boy's senses are now sharpened and new abilities have emerged. The demon said it's the last one. The final class. Ayers looked up at him eagerly. There was determination in his gaze. Now he had a phantom sparring match like practicing with an intangible ghost. The demon tried to hit him, but the boy put his arm out in time to block the blow. Even when he attacks, he doesn't feel the impact. However, in a duel with a demon who wields the highest level of visual acuity magic, and he who has also learned to sharpen his vision, now it was easy for him to determine when and where the blow would come. If this had happened 2 months ago, there was nothing he could have done. Now, after all the hard training and grueling sessions, he is not afraid to face death. He has already fought the demon with ease and freedom. Dodging, he still found gaps in the demon's defense and was ready to strike, but the demonic creature was stronger. So he dodged and hit the guy in the jaw with all his might. His eyes rolled back and his body flew a few meters away. The kid was lying on the ground, completely exhausted after being hit. He hadn't been able to hit him. His eyes were staring upward, no life in them anymore. And now once again he is forced to die. The demon's mad face is already looming over him, preparing to strike a decisive blow. Ayers was lying exhausted on earth. Damn it. This was pointless. The demon still admitted that it was pretty impressive that he was able to take him by surprise and attack him. But that didn't mean it was enough to overpower him. Ayers said emphatically that he wanted to try again. Be that as it may. The demon grinned. He liked the boy's attitude. Soon they finished their daily workout. The boy was in his room, lying in his bed. He turned to the demon and asked, why did he want to destroy humanity? Trainer was determined not to answer that question, and anyway, who cared? The guy wouldn't stop, no, really. He thought about it all the time. Isn't it time to tell him? The demon looked away with a sad look. He said that people wouldn't be able to understand his intention. A great sadness could be heard in his voice. That was hundreds, no, thousands of years ago. He doesn't even remember why or what made him think that. Deep in the caverns where no sunlight reaches, there is a world of chaos with air and brutal power. This is his homeland. In a sad voice, he said that he had a dream. He wanted to leave this demon dimension to see the world in all its delights. Huge oceans, dense forests. The demon's voice became dreamy. Different cultures and technologies. Warm sunshine. He wanted to see it all in person. However, the dreams came true at the snap of his fingers. The other demons wanted to leave too. Racism. Aggravated. Distorted by the idea. Millennia followed the centuries. His purpose had changed as well, just as he was no longer who he was then. Before he realized it, he found that he had become the most feared demon king. Trainer sat on a demon throne covered in blood. Ayers was lying in his bed listening to the demon's story with surprise. Trainer sighed and said that it was all in the past. He imagined what had happened to the demon world after what had happened. Were humans cruel to the rest of the demons too? Asked the boy. Trainer replied that it was the norm. He looked thoughtfully into the distance. In times of war, offense and place are everywhere. They did immoral things. And the Demon King was no different. The boy had heard of the Demon King's overkill. But Trainer had felt it on his own skin. It was unbearable. After a bit of silence, the boy said thoughtfully that he would like to be in the demon world one day. The Demon King questioned him in surprise. The guy said that he had been training him all along, so why not return the favor? Also, he'd like to see a lot of countries. The demon grinned and asked, Is the boy sure he's sure of what he said? Ayres said that an Imperial knight like his father had a quiet life, didn't he? Trainer replied that if the guy becomes an Imperial knight, he won't have time for such things. Ayres realized that he didn't need to follow his father's path. The Demon King wanted to explore the world. That sounds like fun. He'd like to do that. He doesn't want to end up staying in this country for the rest of his life. Trainer looked at the boy in surprise, an answer he had not expected. Dreamily, the boy said he wished he could be a person who could go anywhere he wanted. There was one day left before the school tournament started. Wagons and nobles were based everywhere in the street, and the common townspeople hurried to see the grand spectacle. The tribunes were crowded with a multitude of people. There was an incredible buzz of various human voices everywhere. Everyone looked on in anticipation and couldn't wait for the tournament to begin. The kid was sitting on a bench and was preparing for the performance. Despite his outward calmness, he was filled with a lot of emotions. Trainer said it's more crowded than he expected. It's just a bunch of kids fighting. What's so special about it? Guy replied that the children of the 7 heroes will be participating. Every year, a lot of influential people come here to watch the games, but a lot of people come here to see to know. The demon sighed. At this time, the boy was tying his hands with screws to fix them better. A bright light came on and the announcer's booming voice asked for everyone's attention. The auditorium began to murmur even more. A man dressed in festive clothes stepped into the middle of the arena and began to speak. He said that today was the start of the Imperial Academy graduation tournament. He warmly thanked everyone for attending the event. And then the man began to introduce exactly the competitors who will fight tonight for the title. The crowd buzzed even more, all trying to support their favorites, their voices merging into one single rumble from which it was impossible to understand anything. Sadis also came to cheer for her young master. She shouted with all her might and cheered the lad on. All participants entered the arena. A man in uniform started a detour to remove the rule. He said that each match would follow a tournament format. Tension hung in the air, and the anticipation of battle. Opponents will be allocated by lot. The man began to announce the person who would be the first to pull the lot. He paused dramatically. The first to draw lots will be rival Gene. The crowd screamed again. The girls were crazy about this guy. He had such a majestic rack. Among all the students, he was the best. The girls began to whisper. One of them said that she had heard that he was as strong as a true Imperial knight. In short, this kid was not lacking in female attention and was clearly their favorite. Everyone thought that he would definitely be the winner. Ayres listened irritably, annoyed by the whole thing. The draw hadn't even started yet, and they were already deciding the winner. Rival drew a lot with the number 1 on it. His face was as emotionless as ever, as if he was looking at everyone else with contempt. Rival Jeanette will be going in the first round. Even more power, they couldn't believe they were going to see this guy in the first round. Announced that Urs Reagan would be the next pick. That's all before the whispers started. Apparently the guy was disliked. In the back rows, they started to darned well say this guy's name is the unfortunate heir apparent. It was clear right away that no one would be rooting for him here. A demon floated up behind him and Riley asked, "He's up to something sinister, isn't he?" There was a wry smile on the demon's face. The boy asked him again, but the king only joked back, "Well, this is going to be interesting." The boy walked over to the box and looked at it carefully. The man in the festive uniform just stared emotionlessly at the boy's face. Ayres took hold of the box lightly and pulled it toward him. Suddenly he tossed the box behind the lots upwards, so that all the contents scattered. Everyone present was horrified. What was this guy doing? Suddenly he activated his visual acuity and immediately began to see each of the coins. It was as if time had slowed down for him. He ducked and grabbed lot number 1. Same as rivals. The crowd went. What the hell is he doing? Doesn't he know his place? His father, who had been watching the whole time, slapped himself in the face. That was really dumb. His son is an idiot after all. He couldn't believe that his son was going to ruin a historical tournament. Rival was slowly boiling over with rage. What is this guy doing? Urs gave him a serious look and asked if he knew why he had done it. He understands everything perfectly well, doesn't he? Rival gritted his teeth in anger and looked at the boy with a maddened look. The guy couldn't believe it. He saw the number 1 in a split second. What's he trying to say? He picked Rival. Well, all right, that's the way we're going to be. Everyone was full of readiness and the crowd watched in horror and amazement. Regan, with a voice full of determination, announced that she was declaring war on her rival. He did not relent either, and with the same confident tone said that he accepts his challenge. The people who came to the performance witnessed a real drama and watched the whole thing with amazement and enthusiasm. Everyone was confused. What was the meaning of that? Well, if the opponents don't mind. The herald said that this was not allowed. He called on everyone present to calm down immediately. Suddenly, a man's loud shout echoed throughout the podium. He was calling for silence. A man in royal robes stood up from his seat and looked forward with a stern gaze. It was the Emperor of Solya. Fiona looked in his direction in surprise, frightened. It was her father. Traynor slanted a serious look at him, that face filling him with vague memories of days past. One of the 7 heroes was the magical spearman Solya. The king began to say in a thunderous voice that Regan's actions violated the rules. However, the man turned to Rewall. He said he accepts the challenge. The boy knelt before the king and confirmed his words once more. He raised his face, which had a crazy look of utter determination on it. The guy shouted that he would definitely win this tournament, no matter who his opponent was. It seemed like nothing could stop him at that moment. had been glancing at him all this time. There was no need to draw lots. The king said that he hoped the 2 rivals were equal. The protagonist's father and mother got up from their seats and asked the king not to do this. It's just a silly fiction by their silly son. The king hastened to reassure them. Wouldn't it be impolite to reject a child's challenge? The eyes of the protagonist's father rounded in surprise. Solya spread his arms wide and said in a thunderous voice that he was giving good. Let the fighting spirit be revived. It's not just a battle between graduates. The king's voice sounded enthusiastic as he seemed to like the idea himself. He said that it was a real duel between 2 warriors. All the other participants of the battle looked and listened in surprise. Rival Janet and Regan will fight in the first round, the king announced. He said that he recognizes this duel, as expected from the son of a hero. The kid still hated that phrase more than anything. No matter how hard he tries, all his accomplishments are a credit to his father. For the son of a hero, that goes without saying. Of course it does. He felt his efforts were worthless. After all, those around him do not see him as himself, but as Hitro's son. He did not want to disappoint them, but he could not fulfill their expectations either. These 2 doubts were weighing on his inner world, creating an inner struggle. The views of the protagonist and his rival crossed, neither of them willing to concede. It was not just a duel for them, but a personal battle for honor. 876. The main character's parents watched all of this with horror. His father couldn't believe that his son was stupid enough to mess up the Academy's main event like this. The mother was concerned about whether her son would survive on principle. What the hell is wrong with him? There were only 2 opponents in the arena who were diligently preparing for battle. It was going to be an amazing spectacle. The herald says it's the Imperial Academy's graduation tournament. It's time for the first round to begin. The child of one of the 7 holy heroes of the sword, the best swordsman of the Imperial Academy, rival Janie, and the dark horse of this tournament, the son of hero Regan, Regan. There was a little confusion at the draw, but still. This battle is between the 2nd-generation representatives of the 7 heroes. It's going to be a great spectacle. This has never happened before in the entire existence of the Academy. The demon looked toward his partner in surprise. He asked if he wanted to use it. The boy said no. He wanted to test his strength first, reflexes honed by practicing from the stairs, phantom sparring with the Demon King, visual acuity training, and he wants to see how far he can take the field beyond just simple techniques. The demon grinned, so that's how it is. Not bad. Traynor was pleased with that answer. Sadis looked anxiously and doomedly at her ward. There was excitement in her eyes, and fear for the life of her young master. The guy remembered what he'd said to her then. Just let her watch now, she'll see. She's gonna win this tournament, she will. The maid, with fear in her voice, cried out for the young master to wait. She asked why the guy didn't have a sword. Really, did he forget his weapon? Everyone was surprised, really. What was he doing? Suddenly the guy remembered. Originally he was a swordsman after all. No wonder why everyone had such a reaction. Princess Fiona was furious. How could that be? The crowd boos. Is this kid that nervous? Did he forget his gun? Simple as that. Surely this is the son from one of the 7 heroes. What about the legacy of the hero family? He's the son of a hero and he doesn't even use a sword. Hero. And shouted to his son. He told the guy to quickly go to the waiting hall and get his sword. This is too much. The guy wasn't paying any attention at all. What were they doing? The herald asked if the boy wanted him to bring a sword for him. The boy shook his head in the negative, but there was no need. He proudly showed his hand and confidently said that his sword was his fist. Well, if he says he'll go unarmed, then so be it. Rival stared at him the whole time without saying a word. His gaze was cold and emotionless. This guy didn't seem to have any emotion at all. The first round has begun. All the stands froze in anticipation of something incredible. Rival was amazed at such insolence. Don't let this guy underestimate him. First the toss, and now he also comes in unarmed. This isn't a game. Rival started to pull his sword from its sheath. He lunged at the guy with the firm intention of chopping him to shreds. This was not just a game or some kind of entertainment for him. It was his honor. Rival ran at the protagonist with his sword out in front of him, ready to strike him first. Princess Fiona watched all of this with horror while the crowd furiously cheered for Rival. Suddenly something happened that no one expected. The guy threw a punch, but his opponent stood there unharmed. Looks like he didn't hit his punch. Everyone was confused. In the corner of the cairn, two silhouettes stand opposite each other. The tension in the air is palpable. Was he really able to dodge? Says one figure skeptically, doubting his opponent's abilities. The answer comes instantly, in the form of a whirlwind and a sword cutting through the air. Then how about this? The challenge is thrown and the blade catches up with its target, but in the last frame, the drama reaches its climax. The Imperial sword stands out in the center of the scene, surrounded by an explosion of a profusion of blossoming blades. This moment is frozen, foreshadowing the outcome of the confrontation. The spectators are watching the fighter's every move in suspense. Not every Imperial warrior has skills like him. A whisper spreads through the arena, along with admiration and disbelief. No, wait, I don't see it at all, the sword. Doubt begins to take hold of the audience. The speed of that star, trained in speed reading, Rival demonstrates an incredible skill that calls into question his human abilities. Urs keeps up, concentrating on using his peripheral and dynamic vision to the fullest, proving that his sword skills are as good as his opponent's speed. You can predict an opponent's action by the movement of his eye muscle. He shows that in combat, every detail matters. Urs is adept at dodging all of his opponent's attacks. He utilizes reflexes developed during his training with the latter. Instantly make a move that takes into account the opponent's next move. The results of his training have paid off after all. Now he predicts almost every action of his opponent. Now it wasn't his father's magic sword, it was Urza Regan's style. His own style. Swings his fist to deliver a great demon corkscrew punch. His arm flies forward through space at the speed of light. The crowd freezes in anticipation. There is no way they expected this turn of events. Rival is shocked. His opponent responds with his fist to all sword techniques. This is simply amazing. The guy raises an exhausted face and stares at his opponent with a disheartened look. Urs shows everyone around him his skills that he has honed through hard training. He wants to be proud. The crowd is buzzing. That was a very powerful punch. He is overwhelmed by his euphoria. But suddenly he hears his most hated phrase, as expected from second-generation heroes. The crowd starts whispering, which confuses the guy. What? Talent. Don't let them devalue his training with that word. His father didn't do anything, he just abandoned him. What makes them think that? His father had nothing to do with it. The crowd was celebrating children of heroes. This is just awesome. The demon flew up to him and told him in his ear not to listen to them. It's still possible to get rid of your father's label. Urs clenched his fists. He knew he couldn't back down. I should have thought nothing of it. Rival stood a little ways away and prepared for his next throw. As the boy had suspected, his opponent was on his feet. Rival asked the boy, perplexed, how did he get that power? He gave up the magic he knew and uses physical skills, which he's never seen. Though before, the guy was a swordsman. His opponent was perplexed. What had changed after all? How did he suddenly become so powerful? It's his parents' handiwork, and the kid just stood there silently watching his rival go on a rampage. Urs grinned. If that were true, they wouldn't have such surprised faces right now. The boy pointed his finger at the bleachers. Rival didn't understand anything and just stared at the guy. How did he do it? He just practiced, sparred, and read. His opponent was furious. This can't be. Urs calmly said that it probably wasn't just that. He said that there was a kind man who taught him this style. He thinks he changed his perspective a bit after he met him. The demon heard all this and looked at the boy in surprise. As soon as he entered the academy, he faced an insurmountable wall. Of the children of the 7 heroes, he was the only one missing something. That's what he'd been told his whole life. He didn't have a talent for swordsmanship like Rival. He wasn't strong in magic like Fu. He didn't have martial arts skills like Fiona. He is the one who had no particular talent. His inability to live up to the expectations of those around him became his curse. But this man had told him. The guy paused rhetorically. He told him that he had no talent in handling a magic ball like his father had. So let him use what he is good at. After saying that, the guy really felt better. He doesn't want to emulate the heroes. He wants to go his own way. Kid. His voice was full of determination. Not his father nor his mother. His path he determines only for himself. Rival didn't know what to say. He'd crack with anger right now if he could. The boy gritted his teeth and just stared at his opponent in silence. Suddenly, he yelled for the guy to stop joking. Doesn't he want them to inherit the powers of the 7 heroes? It is the duty of the 2nd generation to pass on the strength and achievements of their great predecessors to future generations. He always drove them because it brought back memories from my childhood. Urs didn't understand. Why was Rival suddenly so angry? He understood his pride in his heroes, but it wouldn't change his point of view. He's here to prove himself. Rival made a lifeless expression on his face. He pointed his sword at the boy, determined to slaughter him here and now. Trainer stood behind and said his opponent entered this state. Before he knew it, a multitude of cuts covered his body. His opponent was moving with such speed that he could not catch a single movement. Sadist, seeing all this, screamed with horror. The demon just watched. Humans are usually only able to operate at 30% of their full potential, but under critical conditions, it can be used to its fullest. This is sometimes called second breathing, or getting into the zone. Some people may intentionally enter this state. Even with his eyesight, it was hard to keep up. The boy barely had time to dodge the attacks. The sharp blade of the sword only a few centimeters from his face. Urs tried his best to protect himself from the blows. They flew at him with increasing speed. Shit, this is no good. It's time to change the current state of things. The protagonist shouted with anger, his eyes filled with rage, evenly enveloping his entire body with magical power. Released from the many channels opened with such pain. Suddenly, something that no one in any way expected began to happen in the arena. Everyone looked over there with horror and impatience. The light of full life and prosperity. This is the magic that the protagonist deserves. It is the strongest technique, the physical strengthening of the Demon King, the breakthrough of the great Demon King. The boy grouped himself together and directed all his strength into one point. The demon flew up to him and asked him who the kid had been up to that point. Gasping in the heat of battle, the guy replied that he was the son of a hero. The demon asked again, "And who is he now?" The guy answered that he was an apprentice of the great Demon King. Well, the demon asked one last question. What does the guy want to become? A sparkling smile appeared on the protagonist's face. He said he wanted to be his true self. His words were filled to the brim with determination. That's right, so let him prove it now. Urs rushed at his opponent, preparing his fist for a crushing blow. The demon called the boy by name for the first time. For the first time in his life, he was recognized not as the son of a hero, but as himself. He would surely repay the demon for everything he had done for him. The boy struck with such force that it seemed that space itself was about to split into many pieces. He'd show the best results with his fists. The boy's face was burning with a mad desire to win, to snatch victory with his teeth, and to prove to everyone what he was worth. He'll thank the demon again. After all, such gratitude is much more worthy than buying a pile of books, isn't it? The demon just stood there, silently watching his student's progress. The guy swung around, and with all his might, he hit the great demon with a flickering punch. The blow was so strong that his opponent just flew aside and hit the wall with such force that it cracked. The guy was steaming. He couldn't even breathe. Everyone looked on in amazement. Had he really won? No one could believe it, because up until now, the guy was just a gray horse in their eyes. It was an incredibly crazy turn of events. The crowd roared with delight. Rival had been defeated. The protagonist stood in the middle of the arena and couldn't believe his own success. Had he really won? Had he really succeeded? At this time, Rival was slowly reaching for his sword out of his last strength. He didn't plan to give up so easily either. The herald had already started to announce the winner of the first round. The crowd was buzzing. The kid was watching his opponent, who was cowering in a corner somewhere in there. Everyone rejoiced that the boy had won. Rival had been defeated. Was still trying to recover from the shock. Rival, meanwhile, was preparing to launch his decisive attack. He didn't even see it coming. All the time, he was preparing his decisive spell with all his might. He couldn't bear the fact that he had lost to some weakling. It didn't take a moment before the black figure of Rival with a crazed look was already rushing to the guy's back to cut him down with a single blow. The crowd came to a horror. Relatives and acquaintances of the protagonist with horror watched what was happening. They tried to wander the guy to finally pay attention to the danger that was rapidly approaching him behind his back. Ayers barely had time to shift his gaze before he felt the cold blade of the sword right before his eye. He remembered those moments in the teachings together with the Demon King. Sitting on the ground, the guy asked him if he could learn this technique. The demon wondered why would he need it. The great demonic spiral, the devil breakthrough spiral. Why? This technique consumes a lot of magical power. It's difficult to control. The guy asked with irony in his voice, really? Concern said that with his current condition, it's virtually impossible. Even if he tries, it will take 6 months. No, the guy was determined that he would master it by all means. He concentrated all his power in one hand, creating his demonic spiral. Right now, he was using the great demonic spiral, Urza's breakthrough spiral. In the guy's hand, a huge demonic vortex began to form, consuming the entire space around him. The crowd was horrified. The herald didn't realize what the hell was going on now. The demon was frightened and watched in horror. He hadn't expected such an act from the boy. He had warned him that it would take a long time to learn this technique. Sadis watched the whole thing with a lifeless stare without saying a word. The guy was already fully prepared to use this spell and repel the attack of the opponent who was coming at him with great speed. But suddenly he was hit in the face by someone else's hard blow, so hard that he couldn't stay on his feet. The guy spun around from such a forceful blow and nearly passed out. Trying to get up, he watched, still trying to figure out who had hit him so hard. Blue, thick smoke started to develop around him. It was his parents. The boy's father looking at him with a somehow too angry look. He didn't bode well. The audience was shocked. Is this the family of heroes? What are they doing here? Ayers tried to get to his knees and screamed. Why did his father stop him? Why did they start all of a sudden? Suddenly, his father announced in public that his son was disqualified. The announcement hit the kid like a thunderclap. It was something he never expected. His father said that the tournament would continue without his son's participation. The boy couldn't believe it. He had worked so hard, and then all his dreams were shattered at once. He ran to his father, screaming for him to explain what all this means. Why is he suddenly disqualified? You gotta say the kid didn't make it. Suddenly, Sadis's voice came from the crowd. The girl all was trembling with fear. She could not believe her eyes. With fear, she dropped her basket from her hands. She didn't pan much. Why? Why? In her mind, the horrible events from her childhood came back to her again and again as soon as she saw that demonic spiral. She shouted, "Why is young master using the Demon King's technique?" Hearing this, the boy became bewildered. He looked at his governess with a dead stare. What's even going on? The Demon King didn't understand anything at all. Was it really this girl? But he didn't have time to finish his speculation. Is this girl really the survivor of Shisanotami City? Sadis couldn't come to her senses, and the protagonist's mother tried to calm her down, but it was all in vain. Ayers also came to be horrified. He had never seen her like this before. The protagonist's father was extremely worried about what had happened. This tornado, the technique the demon used to destroy Sadis's hometown. That's why the girl was so scared. The lad still understood nothing. His father took him by the arm and dragged him earnestly after him. Guy knew his maid was a war orphan, but he had no idea it was this serious. The father asked in a serious tone, how did the son know this technique? And what had he been doing in his absence anyway? The boy was horrified. The father was really pissed off, Erd stammered, saying that he just wanted his father to see how strong he had become. Every day he tried. But his father didn't seem to listen. The expression on the man's face took on a kind of maddened look. He was trying to do what? An Imperial knight would never use something like that. Or would he be willing to go to any dirty trick to win? That's what he said. And the kid just got even more depressed. He had never been recognized by his father. There was a murmur of displeasure in the crowd. The guy knew all these people were wrong, but he couldn't help it. The crowd was yelling at him. The demon turned to the guy, but he was like he was possessed by madness. He said it was his technique. The demon approached him and looked directly into his eyes. Was completely devastated, his gaze expressionless. Finally, he saw his friend. The demon insisted that the protagonist tell his father of his existence. Let him say he made him do it. Didn't understand what the demon was saying, but the one continued. The demonic being said that his father would believe that he exists. Hero knows exactly what only he knows. The demon said it was entirely his fault. He shouldn't have imparted the knowledge of the enemy of humanity to the boy. The boy screamed for the man to stop. He didn't want to hear it. Sadis hugged her mom and tried to come to her senses. Her eyes were filled with genuine terror. "It's hard to be killed by humans," said the demon. Suddenly, the boy wondered if the demon was the one who had been saving him all along. Trainer said it wasn't too late. The boy could still be forgiven. The father looked at his son with genuine anger. The demon was surprised. He wanted to save the boy from punishment, but it seems that he could not do it. The boy smiled and said in a cheerful voice that it wasn't the demon's fault. Approaching his comrade, the boy asked what was wrong with becoming his apprentice. Did not want to back down. His face suddenly became somehow carefree and even ironic. The demon looked at him with an uncomprehending gaze. What is this kid talking about? Said that the demon was just teaching the apprentice his technique after all. Trainer looked at him with a frightened look. It was obvious he was worried about the boy. He held out his hand to him, trying to stop him, but the boy didn't listen to him and went forward. He was determined that he wasn't going to let all these people rob him of all that he had accomplished through this hard training. The crowd was buzzing, but the boy stood in front of them and shouted for them to listen to him carefully. He ordered them all to stop their stupid yelling. Make them shut up just for a minute. Tried his best to get their attention. In a confident voice, the boy said that this technique belonged to his mentor who had put him on his feet. He was the only one who had supported the boy all this time. This is the culmination of his journey, and he doesn't need anyone's criticism. His father tried to stop him, but the kid wouldn't listen to him. Suddenly, he swung around and punched his father in the face with all his might. The man lost his balance and leaned backwards. The crowd was horrified. The son had hit his father. It was unthinkable. The father looked at him sideways and didn't realize what he was doing. In a firm voice, the kid said that was the last time he would call him father. He was in pain all the time. It was hard on the boy. You could see how hard every word was for him. He was compared to his father all the time, and expected him to do better. But his father never even looked in his direction. Not even when they called him a second-generation loser. Here's a guy coming back from his dad saying he doesn't want to be his kid anymore. I wish he'd never been born. When the man heard that, he was stunned. He didn't know what to say. The crowd screamed for everyone to grab the little bastard. He should have been banished. The father tried to call out to his son, but he wouldn't listen. The crowd roared. It was a disgrace. The boy had become a traitor to the warriors. Princess Fiona, along with Fu, ran towards the boy, horror on their faces. Sarcastically asked, did they come to scold him for betraying his father and all the people? The great demonic spiral. Erza's breakthrough spiral was exactly his invention. He used it again. Billows of smoke flying in different directions. The girls closed their eyes to keep the dust out of their eyes. They didn't have time to say anything because the guy immediately disappeared. There was a huge hole where the kid had just stood. No way he went underground. Everyone was shocked. This had never happened before in the night's time. People leaned over and looked down the hole trying to find the kid. They didn't want him to leave. They didn't know what was happening to him. It was awful. The hole was very deep, its gulf going deep down, and it looked ominous. The dark abyss of the hole beckoned. Held his hand in front of him, from which a demonic spiral burst out and cut his way forward through the thickness of the earth. Images from his childhood came back to his mind, back when they were carefree children and played together in the yard. He remembered those moments when his mother never gave him the attention he deserved. He remembered the moment of Sadis's graduation. He remembered his maid's face, and her words that she would never have abandoned the young master. Now his memory was only of her terrified face when she first saw the guy use the demonic spiral. Tears came to the guy's eyes. He knelt and screamed the vast night sky. All the pain he'd saved up all these years. all the resentment he had for the other people for not recognizing his strength ever. He fell to the ground, whimpering. The guy was cursing with all his might. He couldn't do anything. Inside him was a nightmare of different emotions. The demon looked at him from the side. The boy could not even get up. M felt very sorry for his comrade. For this child, at a young age, he had experienced a great deal, which is to be expected. The breakout limit is 90 seconds. Moreover, he used the breakthrough spiral twice. It's not allowed. He doesn't have much magic energy to use such a powerful spell. The demon began to speak uncertainly. He said that at that tournament, a part of him was hopeful. The words came out with great difficulty as he watched his friend suffer. The demon remembered Urz's words to his father. He had seen a different side of the boy at that tournament. He remembered Urz's enthusiastic face when he said he wanted to finally be recognized, and he stepped out of his father's shadow. The events that had happened so recently flashed through my mind. Urz rose to his feet and shouted that the world wanted him to be the perfect hero. They didn't even think he could be stronger. Tears rolled down his cheeks, burning his skin. It was so sad. The demon tilted his head and lowered his gaze. He was sorry it had happened, but there was nothing he could do. But there's only one way to fulfill his wishes. The boy had been lying on the ground the whole time, trying to cope with his emotions. The demon's voice became more confident. He firmly said that it was necessary to surpass his father's achievement. Demon asked a rhetorical question. Does the kid know why the hero is so revered? It's because he defeated him, the ruler of the world, the demon supreme. But if the guy achieves more, then everyone will know about the power of Urz, whether they want to or not. The demons tried their best to cheer the kid up. Urz didn't understand how he could surpass his father. After all, he is a great hero. The demon didn't know it himself, he just snorted thoughtfully. There are many ways to succeed. The demon's voice became thoughtful. You can unite the country and achieve something great. One thing he could say for sure, the answer was not limited to this one empire. The guy needed to target the whole world. Urz lay on the ground and tried to comprehend everything that had been said. He realized that it was the only way out. But how to do it? We need to target people outside the empire as well. Let the boy let him know his name. The guy lay there thinking. They're talking about how to surpass his own father now, aren't they? The boy remembered that each of his childhood friends had some outstanding talent. They practiced constantly to achieve such success. He remembered all his wishes from his childhood. He wanted to become the strongest hero, surpassing even his father. Just think about it. The kid jumped to his feet. He needed to get back to his roots. He had to do it. There was no turning back. There was a tremendous determination in his voice that he himself had never known before. He had to do something greater than his father had done. The demon grinned at the kid. He liked this kind of fighting attitude and was ready to help him in all future endeavors. Urz firmly decided that he wasn't going to let these people ignore them. The boy said they were going to the ends of the earth. The two of them stood gazing wistfully at the night sky full of millions of glowing stars. The guards wondered where the boy had disappeared. They asked each other if anyone had seen the child, but they searched all of 5th Street to no avail. One of the guards said he wasn't on 2nd Street either. Damn it, where is that child? The commander didn't know where to put himself with excitement. Suddenly, some little old man came up to them and asked, "What's the reason they're turning city blocks upside down? Did something happen?" The guard turned to look at him. The man turned to the old man and asked if he knew what happened today at the tournament. It was the largest incident since the end of the war. The protagonist's mother opened the doors with a bang and quickly ran into the house. There was worry and fear on her face. She looked everywhere for her son, but she couldn't find him anywhere. The woman ran into the boy's bedroom, but he was not there. There was just an empty made-up bed in the room. Nothing else. She thought maybe he came home. But no, the boy was still nowhere to be found. The woman looked up with weary eyes. Too much going on today. Even though there are still remnants of the Demon King's army, all the knights have been sent to search for him. But there's still no word on the boy. Hero is already searching outside the capital. If another squad finds the kid first and starts a battle, they'll never get their son back. The woman frantically searches all over the room for her son, grasping at the ghostly hope of finding her child after all. The boy's recent words came to mind. "I don't want to be your child. I wish he'd never been born." It was killing the woman inside. She felt guilty for what was happening, what had happened to him. She stood in front of the boy's closet and stared dumbly inside, as if trying to find her missing child there. His fighting style suddenly changed and also using the Demon King's techniques. It was unthinkable. Did he have complexes because of her and her husband? The woman hesitated for a moment. It seemed like she was beginning to realize something. She didn't think she'd ever taken a good look around her son's room. She glanced around the space of the room. It was most ordinary. A bed, a table, a chair. There was a book of some sort on the table. She picked up a small book and nostalgia pointed at it. It was an academy textbook. This book was different from the ones from their time. The woman was still standing in front of the bookcase. It's a bookcase. It's almost full of reference books and technical literature. Even their generation didn't go that far in their study. And her son worked so hard to get approval. This child was truly criticized all the time. She finally realized what complexes were. He was crushed by too many expectations, but she paid no attention to his hard labor. Even by the standards of the 7 heroes. That was her biggest mistake. She saw that she didn't understand anything. Her eyes were as if covered by a veil. The girl began to cry, horror in her eyes. How could she let this happen? Now she didn't know what to do. The woman fell to her knees and began through her tears to beg forgiveness for her son, whom she could not now bring back. She was a bad mother. She should have been there when her child needed her. She should have been the one to take care of him. She didn't know about anything. She didn't even know what was going on. She didn't know about the Demon King's techniques either. Suddenly, someone shouted at the woman. She opened the doors. Sadie stood in front of her. The maid's face was also filled with horror and sorrow. Why is she here? What is she doing here? And for what, running away from the hospital? You can't do that, you had to rest. The woman was very worried about her. Sadie started talking. Ma'am said that the young master had run away somewhere. Sadie started to say in a trembling voice that she heard something. The girl tried to cope with the fear, and resettled into herself began to speak. She said she heard the nurses at the hospital saying that all the Imperial knights had been sent to find the hero's son. If he's related to the Demon King, he can't escape punishment. When the girl heard this, she couldn't stay there. She too searched all over the city for the young master. Ma'am stood looking at her with a doomed look. The woman ran up to the maid and started to comfort her. She said it would be okay. She and his father would not let this happen. Sadie's couldn't take it anymore, and her voice started to break into a wail. When she was walking home, she heard all the people talking and what she heard, comma. She didn't like it very much. Regan used a trick to get into this competition, and became stronger because he used a forbidden technique. But the girl believed that it wasn't true. She had seen the young master practicing constantly. The way he moves at the beginning of the match, that's definitely young master's skill. The girl shouted that the boy wasn't cheating. It was indeed the young master's strength. She almost cried out. She was the closest to him, and she knows it all. The girl begged her parents to bring hers home. The woman suddenly realized that she was such a terrible mother that she didn't know anything about her son, and now she doesn't know how to bring him back. Mom said that she wanted a maid to always help her. Sadis looked at her with tearful eyes. Determination flashed in the woman's eyes. She was determined to find out everything about her child. She must correct the mistakes she had made. Even if it's too late, even if she's a bad mother. She wants to see her child again, and the woman's voice was confident. It seemed like nothing could stop her. That's what was called maternal instinct. Fiona, along with Urz's childhood friends, were also looking for the kid. They couldn't let their friend just go missing. Urz smirked and asked how long they had been on the road. The demon smiled, faltered, and began to speak softly. 1094. He said that the two of them had been walking for about 4 hours. Urz clutched his head. Shit, that's not too long. But immediately the boy pulled himself back. No, no, no. He's determined to outdo his father, so he'd have to do everything he could to do it. The boy proposed to make camp here. They were walking through a thick forest. The boy asked Demon, "He knows how to make camp, doesn't he?" Demon nodded affirmatively, but there seemed to be a lie hidden in his words. All the knowledge necessary for survival is in his head. Trainar's voice was resolute. More than once in his life he had taken a break from political duties by camping alone in the wilderness. Solitary camping? The boy wondered. It seemed to him that the demon just didn't have any friends. Urz said he had to get food first. He ducked into the bushes and immediately saw a small white rabbit. The boy rushed headlong to catch the little animal, for he was very hungry. But his eyes glistened with madness and his tongue fell out of his mouth. It was as if he had lost his mind. But the kid missed and flopped to the ground. The rabbit quickly galloped away from him in the opposite direction. Clenched his teeth irritably and looked at the fleeing animal with a vicious, predatory stare. The guy started lunging after the beast again and again, until he hit his forehead right into a tree and flew off in the opposite direction. Lay exhausted on the earth. Shit. He couldn't keep up with this brute. The demon looked at him contemptuously. It was unsurprising. Small animals are usually hunted with small arms, and the trees, grass, and horrible roads make for poor traveling conditions. The guy's only fought on flat ground, so he's in a favorable position. Lay on the ground and watched the rabbit, which was approaching in his direction with quick steps. The cute little beast smiled carefree and looked forward. Made a predatory expression on his face and was determined to finally catch this beast. The demon only silently watched it all from the side. It couldn't be helped. Gonna have to help this little guy out. Lying on the ground, he looked unhappily toward the demon. The boy rose to his feet again and almost on tiptoe came up behind him too. The little beast saw and felt everything. Furiously reached out towards him, trying to catch him. Madness glistened on his face. The kid was really hungry and would do anything to catch anything. But the little beast came back again and the boy flew to the ground. And the rabbit only squealed happily and ran away from his hunter. He's been working on his dynamic vision, reflex development, peripheral vision, the decision to instantly perceive the surrounding terrain. Thanks to this, they will determine the most efficient path. The demon said it would show him the way. It's like a beam of light. Trainer loudly ordered the guy to jump in the bushes for 2 hours. That's easy for a kid who played magic ladder all day long, right? Which he'd developed before suddenly came in handy here. It was not in vain at all. Soon he did catch the little animal. The boy held the rabbit with his clinging paws. He finally did it. Lifted the rabbit up and shouted for joy. He had finally caught it. The demon rejoiced too, finally. Now next step. In a cold voice, the demon said that now they should start cutting the meat. Looked at him with a frightened look. This guy didn't see that coming. Cutting? The demon asked. Wasn't it obvious? First you have to kill the rabbit quickly and then exsanguinate it. Hearing such scary words, the guy shook. Wait a minute. Is this one supposed to be done by him? The demon ironically asked. Does the guy see anyone else here? Was beyond terrified. Just don't let the guy say he doesn't want to do it because he feels sorry for the rabbit. Was stunned. He was very hungry, but he felt sorry for killing the poor animals. Suddenly a crunch was heard from the bushes. There were 2 more white rabbits. The little beasts looked at him pitifully with their black eyes. Why are they looking at him like that? Are they family? The sight was incredibly cute and heartbreaking. Didn't know what to do. Don't let them look at him with those eyes. He's just trying to survive. The little white rabbit trembled in his hands with fear. Couldn't stand it after all, and let the little beast out in the wild. He would call it a shooting star. The little beast happily galloped in the opposite direction. His life was saved. The demon is furious at this act, so what the hell is he doing? Trainer ran up to him and screamed. Why did he let him escape? And the boy didn't know what to say and just turned away. Trainer continued to rage. Does the guy even realize his situation? If he doesn't eat, he'll starve to death. His nobility is only making the situation worse. The guy hummed to himself. The demon wanted to say something else, but hesitated half a word and turned in the opposite direction. The boy asked him what was the matter. There was a strange noise coming from far away. It sounded like some heavy thumps. Soon the guy heard it too and was stunned. In front of them stood a huge creature with horns on its head. Its muscular body was almost covered by the sun. In his hands, the monster held a huge sack. The face of the monster was truly terrifying. Its dead eyes glistened with lifeless blackness. 2 huge fangs protruded from its mouth. And what kind of monster is that? Guy and the demon were surprised and wary as they looked in the direction of the monster. Ogres are a race of demons with extraordinary strength and fighting skills. They are ferocious and cruel. A great number of people have been killed by these monsters. When the boy was little, he was told that if he didn't behave well, he would be eaten by an ogre. In a concerned voice, the demon said their business was bad. Ogre is one of the most powerful demons in the world. It's reckless to challenge him now. The guy doesn't have the strength to use magic right now. Just stared at the monster with a frightened look. Ogre stared perplexedly at the kid as well. Suddenly, with a fractional voice, he asked, Is the kid lost? This turn of events made Urz's eyes widen. Said to keep the monster away. His voice gradually descended into a shout. Started stuttering to say, what if the monster came closer? But the guy didn't have time to finish as his breath hitched in fear. The monster just stared at him silently. Suddenly, the monster waved its arms and said it didn't want to fight. It looked like the ogre was as scared as the guy. They looked at each other in surprise, not knowing what to do in such situations. What? Why is that monster suddenly worried? Ogre swore he wouldn't do anything, so there's nothing to be afraid of. Urs was wary. Was the monster trying to let his guard down? The demon replied that it wasn't. The ogres are not intelligent enough to deceive. Suddenly the ogre asked, "Is the guy upset because he's hungry?" Then the monster invited him to her house. She'll treat him. At this turn of events, the boy was stunned, something he didn't expect. Urs said in a frightened voice that it was the first time they had ever seen each other. How could he trust him? The boy remembered that ogres kidnap people and eat them. It's just like in the books. But the demon flew up behind him and told him to calm down. He doesn't want to kill him. Sounds like the ogre is really worried about him. The boy was about to object. The monster seemed to realize something. No wonder humans are afraid of ogres. He apologized for not thinking of it. It was a surprisingly polite ogre. He asked the guy to at least let him show him the way into town. It was pure discrimination because of racial prejudice. Everyone thought ogres were violent, mindless creatures. He's just like people. Urs embarrassedly apologized. He had been wrong about this monster. It turned out to be a friendly ogre. He was so kind to him, he had never met an ogre before. So he was a little scared. The boy was confused and embarrassed. He'd been too mean to this kind man. The guy wanted to explain himself. It was just prejudice. He just looked at him as if he were. He stopped halfway through. The ogre laughed and said in a cheerful voice that it looked like the guy's stomach was empty. Urs was even more embarrassed. Soon they followed the tall ogre, who turned out to be incredibly benevolent. The demon, flying after them. Ogre turned around and asked the kid what his name was. The boy answered that his name was Urs. Urs thought that if he said his last name, the ogre might recognize him. The ogre said Urs was kind. The boy wondered, is he kind? Really, the ogre nodded his head. The monster continued. He said that every person he had ever met was afraid of him. Because aka Poger. I guess that was his name. But Urs was kind and believed him. The boy wanted to object, but the ogre wouldn't listen to him. Urs said he was no better than the others after he had yelled at him. Ogre good-naturedly said that the guy apologized after all and accepted his help. That makes him happy. A wide smile appeared on the monster's face. Wonder if this ogre is so calm, isn't he a little too kind? Soon they arrived at their destination. AKA walked up to a huge house that looked more like a barn. He said this was where he lived. AKA politely apologized for the mess. Next to the house, there was a vegetable garden. The boy was unsurprised by this. Ogre confirmed that he had a small vegetable garden. He grows vegetables here. The boy asked, does he live here alone? The ogre opened the big creaky door and invited everyone to come inside. He confirmed that there is no one here but him. The house was simple but cozy. There was a hole in the middle with firewood in it, probably a fireplace for the ogre. There were large sacks everywhere and equally large vessels. The room was really big, just as big as its inhabitant. AKA cordially invited the boy to take a seat. He said he'd make dinner for now. The boy would have a look around for a while. It's not at all like the houses they build in the Empire. The size of the furniture and tools. Trainer replied that they build houses like this in Eastern countries, but this house is rough in places. The demon ran his hand over the rough walls. It looked like the ogre had built this house himself. He hunts, he grows vegetables. And he built his own house? Urs was shocked. The demon kept poking him. He said the guy was so weak that he was exhausted trying to catch a small rabbit. This ogre is very different from him. He's more independent. Soon, AKA appeared in the doorway holding a plate of food. It smelled delicious and he could smell it right away. There was a lot of simple but very good-smelling food on the table. There was salad in a pot, rice, and a huge piece of meat. Urs was beyond happy. He couldn't believe his eyes. The boy asked, did the ogre buy all this stuff somewhere? He shook his head negatively. AKA said it was the meat of an animal he'd just caught. A salad of wild plants and vegetables from his garden. And this is a cereal from the demon world. Humans call it rice. Urs couldn't move away from the shock. He hadn't tasted it yet, but it already looked delicious. They wished each other a good appetite. The boy stabbed a huge piece of meat with his fork and brought it to his mouth. He immediately smelled the incredibly delicious flavor. As soon as he started chewing, an explosion of emotions seemed to resound in his head. It was a gently flowing gravy, the meat with a crispy crust, penetrating his stomach. It was truly bliss. This juicy rice, it's more rich than most rice. The boy couldn't remember how happy he was. It was delicious. Tears of happiness ran down his cheeks. This fresh, juicy salad. Sadis would get mad at him if he didn't observe the rules of decorum. He shredded the lettuce along with the meat and rice onto his fork and shoved it into his mouth. The guy crunched in satisfaction, the flavor spilling over his mouth like a river. It was simply delicious. This ogre was an amazing cook. Suddenly, AKA turned to the guy. He asked, "Why is he crying?" Urs took his eyes off the food and looked toward the ogre. AKA tearfully asked, "Is it really that tasteless?" Urs couldn't say a word because his mouth was full of food. He couldn't speak with his mouth full. He couldn't object to anything. The boy put out his hand, showing that he wanted to finally reside the food. The ogre looked at him in surprise and fear. He was ready to burst into tears of grief now. Finally living, the guy apologized and said the food was really good. He hurried up and made a weird face. "Very shy," the guy said, crying because he's confused. Actually, he ran away from home. Ogre looked at him in surprise. Urs said in a sad voice that he couldn't tell him how it happened. "He just can't go home, that's why." There was a short pause. The guy jumped up from his seat and, full of determination, said that's why he figured he'd figure it all out himself. But the truth was he couldn't even find enough food for today. With each passing second, the boy was getting more embarrassed. But now that he's eating ogre food, he remembered his home. The boy cried again with grief. He said that all those sad thoughts made him cry. Urs, through his tears, thanked the kind ogre. He just sat there, smiling at him. Suddenly, he held 2 fingers up to the boy's face, just as Urs had done when he tried to say something. AKA said in a good-natured tone that he should thank the guy too. In a gruff voice, he said that although he was a big, scary ogre, he couldn't stand fighting. People are afraid of what ogres look like. So he went into the woods so that no one could be frightened by the sight of him. AKA asked the guy to tell him they had him. The guy was surprised. Ogre said he thought that if he got to know the people better, it might be able to make friends. Hope sounded in the monster's voice. Urs was very surprised at such a strange request. This big ogre is asking him to find his friends. This is unbelievable. Urs asked in a perky voice, "Aren't they already friends?" Suddenly, the seemingly big and strong ogre started wiping his tears with his hand. He said that the guy was really very kind. Urs was stunned by this and didn't know what to say at all. From childhood, he was surrounded by people who always looked down on the guy. Her classmates who wanted to be friends with him, only because he was the son of a hero. The kid never thought he'd have friends he could socialize with as an equal. Ogre was starting to calm him down. Glittery tears appeared in the kid's eyes. At that moment, he realized how right he had been to leave the Empire. The demon watched it all in silence. Son of the man who once defeated a demon king. Called demon a friend? That was very strange. Ogre pointed his huge finger at the forest path. He said there was a river just down the path. If the boy follows the river to the other side of the mountains, he will reach the town. Urs bowed in farewell and thanked the ogre heartily for his hospitality. That monster cleaned the guy's clothes wonderfully. AKA said it wasn't difficult at all. AKA asked the kid, "Is he sure he doesn't want to go home?" Urs sadly replied that he couldn't go back there anyway. Urs asked the ogre if he wanted anything from the city. The guy needed to get out of the Empire, but after all the ogre had done for him, he wanted to thank him. They just became friends, won't he be lonely? One day the boy would come back to him. AKA smiled and said that Urs was truly kind. A small tear appeared in the monster's eyes. Urs asked him what he wanted. Furniture? And replied that what he really wanted was to try the cakes. The guy was surprised. AKA had heard that the cakes made by humans were sweet and lush and delicious. He wished he could try them just once. Urs smiled widely. He understood the request and would definitely fulfill it. Urs turned and said goodbye, saying that he would be back soon. Suddenly, the ogre asked him to wait a bit. He held up his large palm to the boy. And there was some kind of strange amulet, with the image of a demon in it. Urs wondered, "What is this?" AKA replied that it was a talisman from his hometown. Embarrassed, he said it was handmade, so it was a little sloppy. Urs looked at the gift gratefully. The guy asked the ogre, did he make it himself? He nodded his head. AKA said with some concern that he wants to make the boyfriend adventure as safe as possible. He hopes the talisman will ward off any danger from him. Urs thanked his new friend heartily and said with confidence that he would treasure the gift. AKA smiled broadly once more and put 2 fingers forward. Urs clutched the talisman to his chest. He would never forget this. He will never forget Ogre Aka's tears of happiness. Urs waved goodbye. The boy who had found a new friend was on his way again. The ogre stood outside his cabin and gave the boy a friendly wave.